Chapter 638. The black nether dragon seemed to go against the laws of the world. Its enormous mountain-like body floated in the air. The long whiskers on its chin and the patterns on its horn communicated with the primal energies of the universe, creating threads of cold energy that floated around its body like ribbons. Bailey Sushua stood on its head and looked coldly at Minister Li. Marquis Duanmu shouted. A gray life-bond sword light shot out, colliding with the heart-thought sword in front of Minister Li, and giving off an ear-splitting sound. Sword energy spread, tearing apart Minister Li and his clothing. His life-bond sword kept trembling. The gray sword energy on its surface scattered, making his sword look like a huge wolf's tail. His sword was called Wolf King's Tail. It had been made by Yin in the Qin dynasty 100 years ago. The sword energy was all-pervasive and specialized in destroying the enemy's energy. Yet, even though he had blocked Bailey Sushua's attack, the terror in his eyes grew. No matter if it was the sword forms of Lingshu Sword Gate or Mind Chamber Sect, the top sword manuals of the other sects could not have been spread outside, but Bailey Sushua had them at his fingertips. In the world of cultivators, in all the records in history, only Wang Jingmeng had been able to understand the mysteries of other people's sword moves and comprehend how to use them. Now, in his eyes, Bailey Sushua seemed to have become another Wang Jingmeng. Without any extra killing intent and sword energy, he landed next to Minister Li. At this time, Bailey Sushua's attention was not on them, but on the swords under the nether dragon. Those swords came from Marquis Dugu. These magnificent swords had different Yuan Qi powers. The chaotic Yuan Qi powers brought about chaotic power, which could affect the Yuan Qi rules brought about by the opponent and break the opponent's power. But these swords encountered the scales of the nether dragon that were harder than the strongest armor in the world. Other than the frost energy, they were extremely dense and hard and could not cut through. As these swords rubbed against the scales, creating a string of sparks, the energy on the swords was greatly used, and they were at their weakest. Marquis Dugu sensed something and was filled with an ominous feeling. He let out a sharp cry, and the vital essence in his body surged out wildly, wanting to summon those swords back to his side. But Bailey Sushua just waved his hand. It was as if he was brushing the dust off his sleeves. There was no dust on his sleeve, but the power in the air, the golden flames frozen by the nether dragon's breath, and the ice crystals floating motionlessly in the air like gemstones, were all pulled away and turned into meteors. A meteor shower fell on those swords. The ice crystals shattered into powder as they collided with the sword. Then, the golden flames within hit the sword and burned the runes. At that moment, Marquis Dugu had mustered all of his strength. However, at that moment, his body seemed to have been struck by countless meteors. He had no idea how many times he had shaken. Several puffs of blood sprayed out from his mouth like an explosion. Those swords lost their connection with him and fell into the abyss in the belly of the mountain like ordinary iron. Marquis Dugu's eyes were filled with shock and anger. But more than that, there was helplessness and fear. These swords were not his strongest moves. He had stronger life-saving moves that he had not used yet. But in front of Bailey Sushua, he did not even have a chance to use them. His meridians were shattered, and he was so seriously injured that he did not even have a chance to use them. This kind of battle was completely in Bailey Sushua's rhythm, and was completely dominated by Bailey Sushua. This was an insurmountable gap, like an adult fighting a child. Minister Yan's eyes narrowed into a line. Bailey Sushua's strength far surpassed his expectations, but he finally saw a chance. Wind suddenly howled around him, and several shadows appeared where he had been standing. His true body was in front of Bailey Sushua at this time. The poisoned sword in his hand carried wind and thunder as it stabbed towards Bailey Sushua's heart. At this time, his perception finally grasped Bailey Sushua's true position. The most important thing was the timing in the world of cultivators. Even if it was a simple wave of the hand, the wave of the hand needed time. This was the time when Bailey Sushua had no time to deal with him. But Bailey Sushua did not even look at his rapidly advancing figure, and did not look at this strange and terrifying poisoned sword that looked like pieces of spine. His body rose up like he was going to fly into the sky. In reality, he did not move at all, because there was no time to move. What moved was the nether dragon under him. The nether dragon flew into the sky. A dragon claw larger than Minister Yan's body violently and simply slapped towards him and his sword. With a crack, Prime Minister Yan's wrist holding the sword was directly broken, the bones inside shattering inch by inch. But this shattering sound also came from the dragon claw. Some fine scales fell out of the dragon claw. These scales were stained with some black dragon blood. With a muffled grunt, Prime Minister Yan's body flew out faster than when he came. At the same time, the nether dragon gave a furious roar. Its body started to tremble in pain. This pain did not come from the wound in the claw, but from the poison deep in its body. Its dim yellow and scarlet eyes had turned into a sickly green color. There was even a sickly green liquid dripping from the corners of its eyes like tears. Bailey Sushue frowned slightly. He knew long ago that Minister Yan's poison sword was forged from the spine of a legendary beast and tempered with hundreds of poisons. But he had not expected the poison to be so strong. But he was not too worried because the nether dragon's blood was the antidote to the poison. He could sense that the nether dragon was quickly suppressing the poison in its body. At this time, he had time to attack. Therefore, he naturally struck out with his sword. A life-bond sword light surged out of his hand. This time, he used the sword of Min Mountain Sword Sect and the sword essence of Min Mountain Sword Sect. Space quickly froze. The sword essence of this attack was extremely pure and powerful. It seemed to pull all the ice in the world over, and then turn into a holy ice sword. He said he wanted Minister Li to be the first to die, so the target of his attack was still Minister Li. Minister Li's face turned deathly pale. He knew he could not stop such a sword. Marquis Duanmu's face was also pale. He knew Minister Li could not stop it, so he could only attack with all his power to help Minister Li block some of the power of this sword. The gray sword energy on the Wolf King tail in his hand grew like wild grass. With all the power he squeezed out, it faced the simple ice sword falling from the sky. These gray sword energies were meant to destroy energy that did not belong to him, but were useless at this time. These sword energies did not even have a chance to extend before they were frozen. With a muffled sound of collision, the life-bond sword in his hand was sent flying. His spine had been shattered into several pieces. His body was thrown back by the huge force. Chapter 639. This unimaginable power for ordinary cultivators did not just break his spine, it also rampaged through his body, shifting his organs and cracking them. Marquis Duanmu could not suppress this power, and even his vision blurred. The original pride in his heart had completely turned into disbelief and fear. Even he was not a match for Bailey Sushue. What was the difference between the present Bailey Sushue and the past Wang Jingming? You are the one who is truly invincible below level 8. Such a thought flashed through Prime Minister Li's mind for no reason. He sensed this sword essence that could freeze the world, and knew that in terms of seal essence and sword essence, he was too far from Bailey Sushue's level. When Marquis Duanmu's body was thrown back, he raised his hand and flipped open his palm. There was a small silver seal in his palm. This small seal was made of jade, but almost none of the jade in the world was silver. So this small seal was very special. There was a muffled boom. This small silver seal seemed to contain an ocean. This ocean water vibrated in the small seal and seemed to attract the power of the tides in the world and crashed towards Bailey Sushue's sword essence. The power of an ocean was too great, much less a tide that could affect all the oceans in the world. This power seemed to be able to tilt the entire world. Minister Li could not stop Bailey Sushue's sword, but this small seal could. This was a seal weapon that could be described as a divine weapon. If the nether dragon charging out of Min Mountain today could shock the world, then this small seal was at least as shocking as the nether dragon. Seeing the appearance of this small seal, Bailey Sushue's expression became strange. The emotions on his face became extremely complicated, but there was no shock or fear. It seemed to be a kind of emotion and joy, like he had finally waited. This kind of emotion was so strong that even Marquis Duanmu, who was seriously injured and his consciousness was blurring, sensed it clearly. He had a bad feeling. This kind of ominous premonition came most strongly from Prime Minister Yin. His heart involuntarily pounded like a drum, violently pounding against his chest, as if it was about to jump out of his body. This was an intuition that only cultivators of his level could have. In the next moment, his killing intent was directed at Wang Chong. However, no one had time to react. Bailey Sushue's sword had already collided with the silver seal. The pure and transparent ice sword that carried with it a divine aura originally had the power to freeze and pierce through everything. However, the moment it came into contact with the small silver seal, what it truly displayed was a prying power. This ice sword was like a crowbar that had pried up a mountain. It directly pried up this small seal and pried it towards Minister Yin. Everyone was already extremely shocked in their hearts. However, at this moment, this kind of shock was even greater than before. This was what Yi Sealing had learned from his master, the sword intent of one heavenly water. It was called prying a pool of spring water. But at this time, Bailey Sushue casually used it and moved the tides of the entire world. There was a loud boom. The terrifying power contained in this small silver seal was guided by Bailey Sushue and smashed onto Minister Yin. Countless splashes of water bloomed into balls of dust on the stone cliffs of Min Mountain behind Minister Yin. A several-mile-long crack appeared on the mountain wall of Min Mountain, from which a silver-white waterfall fell down. The rocks and trees in the crack turned to dust. The air was twisted by the surging energy as though a crack had appeared in space. Minister Yan's body smashed into the mountain crack like a meteor. He did not know what method he used to survive this attack, and was still standing. But hundreds of terrifying wounds appeared on his body, and the energy and blood in the wounds bloomed like bright flowers. Marquis Duga's body retreated in the air. He did not know what to do. Minister Li's hands trembled. He could not even breathe as he looked up at the sky. Bailey Sushue had put away his sword. He did not stop and did not even look at him and Minister Yin. The nether dragon was like an enormous black pillar in the air, still flying straight into the sky. Bailey Sushue stood on its forehead and became a tiny black dot in his sight. Breaking through the wind and clouds, Bailey Sushue left this mountain peak, left this little world he had formed by drawing on the power of Min Mountain, and flew through the air. At this time, he was just floating up, but both Minister Yin and Minister Li understood where Bailey Sushue was going and his true intentions. While he did not leave the mountain and lived on Min Mountain outside the city, his heart was connected to Chongling. Many years ago, when Wang Jingming died in Chongling, his heart wanted to go to Chongling. Zheng Xiu used the Spring War against the Chu to stir up the world, and finally took control of Jiaodong Commandery. This small seal was the true foundation of the Jiaodong Commandery's Zheng family, the Sea King seal sealed in the ancestral hall. With such a seal weapon, in the view of her and the two ministers, killing Bailey Sushue and destroying Min Mountain Sword Sect was done. But now, this seal weapon was in Min Mountain. The two ministers and many marquises were gathered in Min Mountain. This was what Bailey Sushue had been waiting for all these years. Wang Jingming died. Yuanwu ascended the throne. He cultivated the sword in seclusion. At the same time, he raised a nether dragon. Wang Jingming wanted to fight his way into the Chongling Imperial Palace, but did not succeed. His heart was set on accomplishing this task. The dust under Minister Yan's feet was soaked in his own blood. He looked at Bailey Sushue, who seemed to be riding the wind, and his entire body started to tremble like Minister Li. From the start, Bailey Sushue said he hated people like Minister Li the most, but thinking about it now, it seemed like a joke, because in terms of hate, who was more hated by Bailey Sushue than Zheng Xiu? Such a thought was so obvious, but he felt that killing him was very simple and within reach. He had not thought of this. He was like an idiot. The nether dragon was enormous and flew through the air. When it broke through the clouds and landed in the sunlight, the cultivators surrounding Min Mountain all saw it. Everyone's expression changed. The nether dragon seemed like it was going to charge into the red sun in the sky. Then it quickly moved through the air and flew towards Chongling with a terrifying presence. All the cultivators loyal to Zheng Xiu quickly sank into an atmosphere of defeat and terror. It was like a joke. So many people had come to kill Bailey Sushue. Yet Bailey Sushue rode a dragon towards Chongling. That was a height that flying swords and seal weapons could not follow. No Realm 7 could catch up to Bailey Sushue like a dragon in the sky. No one could stop Bailey Sushue from entering Chongling and the Imperial Palace. At this time, the two ministers were not in the Imperial Palace. Yuanwu was also not in the Imperial Palace. A woman with a scar on her face stood by a clear stream. Her violent aura had already caused all the fishes and shrimps in the stream to float on the surface of the water with their bellies turned white. This woman with a scar on her face was naturally the young master of the Qin country, Ji Qingqing. Looking at the black shadow in the sky, and Bailey Sushue, who was riding the wind towards Chongling, she immediately gave off a joyful presence. She even waved her arms at the nether dragon like a young girl and shouted happily. Chapter 640. A Dragon in the Sky. At this time, Bailey Sushue caused many cultivators to tremble in fear. But when he looked at the outline of Chongling, other than hatred, there was no pride in his eyes. This was an enormous city with no end in sight. Many years before Yuanwu ascended the throne, this city, which was possibly the largest in history, had more than 1 million people living in it. Not to mention the people coming from the commanderies and the merchant caravans from the various dynasties and regions. Regardless of whether Yuanwu and Zheng Xiu stole this place in the end, he was not as good as Wang Jingming in making the people live and work in peace, and the dynasty prosper, and he could not do it. As to Wang Jingming fighting his way into Chongling and dying in battle, he was not stupid. He had not thought of using a method like him to enter the imperial palace. But the situation forced him to use this method in exchange for the survival of some people. Back then, Wang Jingming did not have more than a decade to prepare like him. So compared to Wang Jingming, he felt he had nothing to be proud of. Even if their opinions were different, even if Wang Jingming did not listen, the other was a real person and did not disguise his thoughts and emotions in front of him. So even if he was angry at Wang Jingming, even if he closed the gates and did not give Wang Jingming a chance to meet, he was just angry. He felt that time would let Wang Jingming see clearly. But he had not expected the change to be so fast and intense. Since Wang Jingming was his best friend in his mind, he naturally would take revenge for Wang Jingming. He naturally would finish what Wang Jingming had not done back then. The nether dragon entered Chongling. It flew so high that even the falling moon in the corners of Chongling could not reach it. But when it flew through the air, the shadow it cast was like an enormous moon that covered these tall turrets. In a quiet residence in Chongling, a youth in luxurious robes stood in front of the window of a pavilion. He looked at the dragon moving grandly along the central axis of Chongling with a dark expression. This was the Duanmu Marquisate establishment. This youth in luxurious robes was Duanmu Jingzong. He was one of the geniuses of Chongling, a student of Min Mountain Sword sect, but he had been an important pawn for Zheng Xiu during the Min Mountain Sword trials. At this time, his father Marquis Duanmu was leading an army up Min Mountain. The Duanmu Marquisate establishment naturally sat firmly on Empress Zheng Xiu's side. At this time, Chongling was very empty. Duanmu Marquis residence was also very empty. The powerful cultivators summoned back from the army and the consecrators of the mansion all followed Marquis Duanmu up Min Mountain. As he looked in terror at the nether dragon flying over from Min Mountain Sword sect, a petite but cold and arrogant young woman walked into the empty Duanmu Marquisate establishment. Duanmu Jingzong was still looking at the dragon shadow in the sky. He had just smelled blood and sensed unusual energy vibrations. The moment he looked down, he saw the figure of this young girl. Blood drained from his face. "What do you want?" He couldn't help but cry out. However, even he himself knew the answer to this question. This young girl was Jing Lioli. Moreover, she had come here stepping on fresh blood. Jing Lioli looked at the young man whose face was whiter than the white powder on the wall because of fear. Her face naturally showed a strong sense of ridicule. Based on her personality, she would not have deigned to answer at this time. But when she thought of her studies in this city and what Ding Ning had said to her, she knew that an answer at this time would increase her opponent's terror. So she looked mockingly at Duanmu Jingzong and said coolly, "Are you an idiot? Your father went to Min Mountain to kill my master. I came here to kill the people of the Duanmu Marquisate establishment. This is a very fair matter." Duanmu Jingzong was one of the top young cultivators in Chongling, but he was a disciple of Min Mountain Sword sect and knew Jing Lioli very well. The more he knew how terrifying Jing Lioli was. Hearing these words, his body trembled in terror. He said in a trembling voice, You do not fear you will not be able to leave Chongling?" This was the weakest threat. So Jing Lioli's disdain grew. She turned and looked around at the city that was panicking because of the flying dragon in the sky. She looked at the chaotic turrets that were trying to find Yi Sealing. She sensed the energy vibrations in the air caused by the fighting between the officials of the Divinity Bureau and the Astrology Bureau. At the same time, she laughed. Chongling is very chaotic right now. Chongling was in chaos. This meant that even if someone like him was killed, no one would care. No one would have the time to care. Duanmu Jingzong knew he could only rely on himself. So he said almost pleadingly, "Senior sect sister, I am also a disciple of Min Mountain Sword sect. Just because you are a disciple of Min Mountain Sword sect, do not think of fleeing. I will give you a chance to fight fairly." Jing Lioli looked at him and said calmly. Just as she spoke, Duanmu Jingzong gave a beast-like howl. A ball of mist rose in front of him. He used the mist as cover and furiously shot backwards. However, it was also at this moment that he stopped shouting. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Jing Lioli's side profile. Jing Lioli's figure was next to his. His body unconsciously froze. There was a soft sound. He looked in bewilderment towards the source of the sound. He saw the afterimage of a black stone sword retracting. His heart had been pierced through, and he could see the scenery behind him. Why use a sword like this? When his fear reached its peak and everything settled down, his mind became numb. He asked this question without any reason. Jing Lioli's sword was very ordinary. It was the Bink Wash sword. It was a stone sword refined from inkstone in the Min Mountain Sword Valley. What he did not understand at this time was that since Min Mountain Sword sect had made preparations and Jing Lioli had entered the city to kill while the city was empty, then she should have used the best sword of Min Mountain, and not this ordinary stone sword. Wash away all the impurities. Master wants me to fight without relying on talent or the sword. Jing Lioli put away her sword and answered the last question of his life. Also, this is just training. I am not the main character of today's Chongling. Jing Lioli walked out of the bloody Duanmu Marquisate establishment without any hesitation. The suppressed sobs of women and children came from the depths of the Duanmu Marquisate establishment. Her footsteps suddenly stopped, and her eyes narrowed slightly. In an alley to her side stood a young man. Just like Marquis Dugu, he carried many swords on his back. This was Dugubai. Jing Lioli just narrowed her eyes and glanced at him. She recovered her calm and said, "Since you have discovered me, but have not brought anyone, and have no killing intent, what do you mean?" Dugubai looked at her and took a deep breath. He said, "I am a disciple of Min Mountain Sword sect." Jing Lioli frowned slightly and said, and then Dugubai said, "My father helps the Empress. I help you and Master." Chapter 641. Not a bad choice. Then follow me. Jing Lioli did not stop. She walked past Dugubai and spoke to this youth, who had used a great deal of courage to make such a decision. Then she looked up at the nether dragon that was approaching the Chongling Imperial Palace and said, "Master once said, no matter what one's birth is, those who do not know how to walk their own path cannot go far on the path of cultivation. What determines if you become king is not how much power you have, but whether you submit and live." Dugubai was speechless. He also glanced at the nether dragon and was full of admiration again. The mountainous nether dragon finally landed above the imperial palace. Its enormous body covered the light in the sky. As its energy rippled, it started to snow. An astounding number of cultivators gathered around the imperial palace. The cultivators of Chongling all had their own choices. After the Yuanwu Emperor's decades of management, Most cultivators chose to swear loyalty to him. Countless sword lights gathered together and formed a blinding rainbow around the imperial palace. This scene was exceptionally spectacular, and the killing intent was extremely terrifying. When the nether dragon's figure was slightly lower in the air, many seal weapons and sword lights broke through the air, leaving behind strange paths of light in the air. The terrible green in the nether dragon's eyes had faded. It started to breathe furiously, as the strange dragon roar from its body resounded through the sky. Whether it was its breathing, its fleshy tentacles and claws, or the patterns on its extremely hard black dragon scales, all of them started to spew out black, cold air. Ice first appeared in the sky, and then these ice pieces formed enormous pieces of ice that fell furiously. These pieces of ice collided with the primal energies of the universe and soared lights on the ground. Most of them did not fall to the ground, but exploded in the air. The fine pieces of ice created by the explosions quickly froze. In the eyes of all the cultivators on the ground, the shadow around the nether dragon grew larger, like an enormous ship that was constantly growing larger in the air. Frost froze between the tiles. The coldness that was many times thicker than the frost of the world caused these tiles to become unusually brittle. With the slightest vibration, they would give off ear-piercing cracking sounds. As usual, Empress Zhengxiu stood behind the spirit spring under the patio of her study. She did not need to look up to sense the nether dragon's approach. Other than her, the other cultivators who could stop the nether dragon's approach were all around Min Mountain, much less kill it in the air. The nether dragon did not need to land directly. Using its energy as cover, Bailey Sushue could easily enter the imperial palace and appear in front of her at any time. In the eyes of almost everyone outside, she should also hide. She could escape. However, no one knew what she was thinking. She just stood there coldly, waiting for Bailey Sushue's arrival. There were many metal dolls on both sides of the stone path leading to her study. They were all mechanical seal weapons. Behind the walls on both sides, or in the shadows of the courtyards, there were many cultivators waiting. Suddenly, her perfect eyebrows twitched slightly. A speck of light appeared in the air above the stone path. It was as if space was being distorted by a strange power, and a door was about to appear. A Jiaodong commandery cultivator hidden in the shadows sensed something and was about to attack. However, he found himself unable to move. The blood in his body froze, and then he quickly died. The seal weapons in the stone path that would usually be activated due to slight energy vibrations did not move, because even the energy flowing through the seal scripts inside were frozen, much less the mechanisms. Silently, Bailey Sushue's figure stood on the stone path. A streak of white frost spread from his feet. When it was dozens of feet away from Zhengxiu, this streak of white frost did not advance, as though someone had cut it neatly. There was some silent starfire burning on the edges of the white frost. No one moved, not even the most loyal death warriors. Because Zhengxiu spoke at this time. She looked at Bailey Sushue and asked coldly, "How does it feel to come here?" Bailey Sushue did not bother to look at her face. He looked at the starfire burning on the edges of the white frost and responded coldly, "It feels good. You feel that there is nothing wrong with what you did?" Zhengxiu was silent for a breath of time, then looked at him and said. Bailey Sushue frowned and finally looked up at her, but did not speak. People are always changing. Complicated flames danced in the depths of Zhengxiu's wooden eyes. She slowly said, "A person's life, from young to old, no matter if it is their personality or mentality, how many changes will occur? Back then, when you first learned the sword, were your thoughts and conduct the same as the current you? I was very young then, a young woman who had just entered Chongling. I carried many things you could not imagine. Many times, I did not know what to do. There might be more experts coming from outside the imperial palace, but Bailey Sushue was not in a hurry. He patiently listened to Zhengxiu's words and then laughed disdainfully. You say this. Do you mean that because of me, you were forced to become such a person? I do not worry or care about what other people say to him. But you were once his best friend. Zheng Xiu's complexion was originally very white as porcelain, but when she said these words, her complexion seemed even paler, so white that even her flesh and meridians seemed somewhat transparent. I will be worried about what you said to him. She looked at Bailey Sushue and said softly but coldly, before I thought about what kind of person I would become, you said to him that I was not a good partner. You made your judgment too early. Your thoughts are in chaos, so your reasoning is also in chaos. Bailey Sushue shook his head and said, You mean that no matter how many wrong and evil things you did, no matter how bad you were before, when you decided to be a good person in the end, everything before did not exist? Also, you have not turned over a new leaf and became even more evil in fear of your bad deeds being exposed. You came to this step because of my words? Everyone has their own reasons. You feel that it is not because of you, but if not for you, he may not have suspected me at all, and I may have decided to be the person he hoped for. Zheng Xiu's chest rose and fell violently. She looked up into the sky and said slowly and seriously, Many things change because of some small things. In your view, I caused his death, but in my view, the one who caused his death may be his best friend. Bailey Sushue rarely smiled. Even if he did, he would only show a cold smile. But at this time, hearing Zheng Xiu's words, he laughed and laughed loudly. You said so much, wanting to confirm your reason to kill me, wanting to arouse your fighting spirit and perfect your sword essence, but you only exposed a little. Your own heart is in chaos. Even today, you are still regretting it. You are still thinking, if not for me, maybe you and Wang Jingming could have become the most perfect couple in the world. Bailey Sushue looked at Zheng Xiu with mockery and sympathy. He said, I really feel sorrow for you, Enwu. Chapter 642. Zheng Xiu looked at Bailey Sushue, the fire in her eyes gradually extinguishing into indifference. She finally understood that no topic of the past could cause Bailey Sushue to waver, because the other was an existence that would not waver for anyone or anything. His mind was always perfect. Just like right now, no matter how many cultivators gathered outside the imperial palace, they could not affect Bailey Sushue's mind. Bailey Sushue acted as though he did not exist. He was full of murderousness, his mind perfect, and only cared about the little world he and she were in. There is an old saying in Chongling, 3 years old sees old. Bailey Sushue looked at the cold her and said, This old saying is that people are hard to change. If you feel that my judgment of you back then was wrong, then you will be the right person, and I will be wrong. But you still died because of my words and became the kind of person in my judgment. How do you make me think highly of you? Bailey Sushue's expression was calm as he said this. From when he first appeared in front of her until now, he was mocking, disdainful, cold, but not angry, because she was not worthy of his anger. She was the kind of person he saw. She was not his friend. How could she be worthy of his anger? So while his expression was calm, and his tone was calm, everyone could feel the disdain, and disdain in his words were thicker than at any other time. I look down on you. No matter what you become, no matter if you were the genius of Jiaodong Commandery back then, or the Empress of the Qin dynasty now, I look down on you. You have been waiting for a chance to kill me, but have you ever thought about it? I also need a chance to see everyone in Chongling clearly. Zheng Xiu was not angry and said calmly, You came to kill me with such fanfare. Chongling is so chaotic right now. All the little fish and shrimps will appear. I can see who is on the side of the Bazinkindo ground, and who is on my side. Bailey Sushue retorted, More importantly, you can still live. Zheng Xiu said without hesitation, I can live. Bailey Sushue sneered and said, Even if you can live, what is the use in making the people of Chongling show their true intentions? The people who oppose you will either be killed or flee and become great rebels like Bai Shanshui. How much power will your Qin dynasty have left to conquer? Zheng Xiu suddenly smiled. Her smile was cold, but filled with a soul-shaking power. What if I tell you that you can quickly win the war against the Chu and the destruction of the Chu? Bailey Sushue frowned. Everything in the past, including the current situation of life and death, was unable to affect his state of mind at all. However, Zheng Xiu's words caused great waves in his heart. He suddenly realized that Zheng Xiu's last few words were purposely said to bring out this last sentence. The result of the Qin and Chu war was a foregone conclusion in everyone's view. The million-strong army of the Qin dynasty was retreating, and the only result was trapping Ding Ning, Zhang Sun Qinxue, and the others. The Qin dynasty was defeated in this war between two dynasties. Even if he could not kill Zheng Xiu today, Chongling and the Qin dynasty would be greatly weakened. Yet Zheng Xiu said that they could quickly win the war against the Chu, and that the destruction of the Chu was inevitable. He could not think of the reason for this possibility, but he could sense Zheng Xiu's confidence. For cultivators like him and Zheng Xiu, the influence of their minds was more important than some vital energy vibrations. The battle had started from the moment he appeared in front of Zheng Xiu. His words caused Zheng Xiu's mind to panic, but as Zheng Xiu spoke, Zheng Xiu's mental state was swept away and reached perfection. Her presence reached a peak. At this moment, a wisp of pale, white starfire suddenly appeared in the sky. It was as if an indifferent eye had opened in the endless void. This kind of direct combat was extremely rare to Zheng Xiu. In the vast majority of her previous battles, she had only controlled the astral yuan qi to form swords from afar. Hence, the starfire swords she had condensed were filled with an aura of desolation and coldness. At most, it would give off a sinister and strange feeling. However, at this moment, her starfire sword had something that it didn't originally have. It had a kind of dignified aura of a king. Stealing from Min Mountain Sword Sect to deal with me. Do you not find it laughable? Do you only know how to steal your entire life? Bailey Sushue said expressionlessly. He knew that the strength of Zheng Xiu's starfire sword came partly from Min Mountain Sword Sect's heaven-replenishing divine art, in addition to Zheng Xiu's perfect mental state. When he said this, a cultivator appeared behind the stone path he was standing on. This cultivator had an ethereal presence, and was very similar to his presence when he had been standing at the peak of Min Mountain. This cultivator was Huang Daochen of Lingshu Sword Gate. After Qi Jinshan's Qi sect and Yi Sini's Yi sect decided to leave Lingshu Sword Gate, he naturally became the master of Lingshu Sword Gate. At this time, in this city, other than Zheng Xiu, he was the person closest in strength to Bailey Sushue. The moment he appeared, the power he had accumulated furiously surged out of his body. The terrifying energy vibrations caused the entire imperial palace to tremble. Yet, the light blue sword light formed by this power was ethereal. It was pointed at Bailey Sushue, but people could not catch it. Everyone had their own needs. Huang Daochen's appearance did not cause Bailey Sushue to have any extra thoughts. Facing these two strong enemies, he did not care about the pale star fire falling from above. He turned his hand back and used his fingers as a sword to attack. A beam of light blue sword light seemed to have been forced out of the void and appeared in the air several feet behind him. At the same time, a golden sword light shot out of Bailey Sushue's fingertip and slashed at the light blue sword light. This golden sword light was dazzling and carried a kingly presence even stronger than Zheng Xiu's starfire sword. It was a presence of a ruler descending from the heavens. Huang Daochen's eyes shone with disbelief. With an ear-piercing crack, his body uncontrollably retreated more than a dozen steps. The ground he stepped on as he retreated was crushed to powder. A light blue life-bond sword appeared in his hand. At this time, this sword was shrouded in a powerful presence. In everyone's perception, it was still like an enormous mountain. But the tip of this life-bond sword had been cut off by Bailey Sushue. This was a sword move from Yuan Wu's Phoenix Breaking Sword Manual. But Bailey Sushue had casually used it. Huang Daochen and Bailey Sushue's cultivation were very close. This sword had cut off a part of his life-bond sword and used all of Bailey Sushue's power. Bailey Sushue naturally did not have the power to deal with Zheng Xiu's starfire. The pale starfire was very close to him. The cold and powerful aura of nirvana had already oppressed the air around his body to the point that many gem-like crystals had appeared. However, it was also at this time that a green leaf entered the space and landed on that streak of starfire. Chapter 643. The presence of this green leaf was completely different from this star fire. One was pure annihilation, while the other was an extremely fresh vitality. It was as if it would blossom with infinite possibilities. This green leaf blocked the path of the falling starfire. At the same time, it seemed to block Zheng Xiu's vision and cut off her connection with the starfire. The pale and cold starfire landed on this young leaf. The light illuminated this green leaf until it was completely transparent. Yet, to the shock of all the cultivators who saw this, not a single strand of starfire could pass through this young leaf. The flowing flames flowed along the edges of the green leaf like a waterfall and scattered between the palaces of the imperial palace. Many hard stone walls, and even the metal used to decorate the palaces, were silently burned to white ash by the starfire and scattered like thousands of butterflies. Why did you betray me? For the first time, anger burned in Zheng Xiu's eyes. She turned to look at a palace to the left and said directly. There was an explosion. The palace directly exploded outwards, and the entire building was torn apart. The green yuan qi inside expanded outwards, like the growth of a large tree. More than a dozen angry shouts were heard along with the figures who were rushing out. These cultivators lying in ambush outside the building had not sensed that such a powerful cultivator had appeared in the palace. Pan Rui's figure appeared at the center of the green energy. The green yuan qi that had exploded during the collision did not dissipate. Instead, it condensed into countless green leaves that floated around her body, filled with a majestic aura of life. Seeing such a scene and sensing such a presence, even Bailey Sushiwa's eyes were filled with shock and admiration. He knew the strength of everyone around Zheng Xiu and Yuan Wu. He had sensed Pan Rui's arrival, or rather, Pan Rui had deliberately released a thread of energy for him to sense. But he was certain that not long ago, Pan Rui could not have possessed such power. At this time, Pan Rui looked up slightly and answered Zheng Xiu's question. You should know where my method comes from. Don't forget, even if your master is Ji Qingqing, I was the one who helped you find your master. You can even be considered an orphan that I raised. Everything that you have after that was given to you by me. Zheng Xiu looked coldly at her and said slowly, Anyone can betray me, but you cannot. Pan Rui looked at her cold face and said, How did I become an orphan? Zheng Xiu said coldly, It has nothing to do with me. But I suspect. Pan Rui looked down at the ground and said, Even when I tried my best to investigate my origins, I could not find anything. Even if it has nothing to do with you, what you did to my master already makes me suspect you. You should know, my master has always thought of you as her best sister. Zheng Xiu's lips curled up and wanted to say something. Pan Rui said, I do not want to be used by you. Does this count as giving me an explanation? But kindness is kindness. Even if betrayal doesn't need a reason, everyone will think about their own future. But even if you obtained that cultivation technique that Ji Qingqing and I wanted back then, your current state of mind and sword intent are not perfect enough. Then you still won't be a match for me. When Zheng Xiu said this, she reached out with her right hand and pointed at Pan Rui. Her hands had been cleaner than the whitest porcelain in the world, but when she reached out with a finger, her entire right hand turned as black as the night sky. Only the finger pointing at Pan Rui was crystal white. Space rippled in front of her, and visible ripples appeared in the air. A thread of condensed, deathly stillness came out of her body from the depths of her energy sea. A pale white pillar of light shot out of her fingertip. With a boom, it ignited the green energy around Pan Rui. A harsh shout came out of Pan Rui's mouth. The green leaves around her quickly turned into yellow, withered leaves, and then red leaves like autumn maple leaves. In a flash, the energy changed 3 times, and each time, it gave off stronger power. But it still could not stop this power that seemed to be pulled out of Zheng Xiu's body. Her body seemed to have been smashed by an incomparably huge, invisible fist. She was forcefully blasted out of this burning yuan qi, smashing through several courtyard walls. The most terrifying thing was that there seemed to be a pale, white mark branded between her brows. This mark was like a living white candle flame, constantly jumping on her forehead. With just one strike, Pan Rui's body was fractured in many places. She looked extremely wretched. Also, this mark was constantly wearing down her energy. She had to expend an astounding amount of energy to resist it, or the flame would burn into her brain. But at this time, Bailey Sushua did not pay any attention to her. A person like him naturally knew how to make a choice at this moment. He narrowed his eyes slightly. He pulled out his sword and attacked. When he pulled out his sword, there was nothing in his hand. But when his body passed through dozens of feet and appeared in front of Zheng Xiu, there was a transparent and pure ice sword in his hand. Zheng Xiu's body was immediately covered in a layer of transparent ice. Even Zheng Xiu was frozen to the ground by the power of this sword and could not dodge. She had used all her power in the blow that had seriously injured Pan Rui. This was the best time for Bailey Sushua to kill her. Even Huang Daoqin could not stop him. But at this time, the ring finger of Zheng Xiu's left hand moved slightly, like she was picking up an invisible thread. Deep in her energy sea, something heavy seemed to be pulled up by this thread, and then flew out of her left hand. Bailey Sushiwa's pupils contracted, and he felt a strong sense of wariness. His intuition was that this was a sword energy. Who else in the world could make him, a swordsman who was invincible in Realm 7, like the Donghu monk, feel a strong sense of wariness? He was certain that this power did not come from Zheng Xiu. A cracking sound was heard. This sound was very low, but it first appeared on the ice sword in Bailey Sushiwa's hand. Then when Bailey Sushua let go of the sword, it appeared on his arm that held the sword. His sleeve split open. A deep cut appeared at the bottom of his arm, and blood flowed out. Bailey Sushua retreated, and his energy sealed the wound. The sword chi that injured him was still spreading in the air. It was a mixture of gray and gold. It was extremely straight in the air, making people who saw it feel inexplicably absent-minded. The ice around Zheng Xiu's body shattered into powder, and a beautiful wisp of blood gushed out from her almost transparent lips. This is his time sword. You are thinking of ways to avenge him, but you probably would never have thought that the thing that saved my life and injured you was instead a strand of sword energy that he left for me. Do you not find it ironic? She looked mockingly at the retreating Bailey Sushua and laughed. Chapter 644. I feel it is ironic. Bailey Sushua was not in a hurry to attack. Zheng Xiu needed time to rest. He also needed time to control some vital energy in his body. Surrounded by cultivators, any forceful attack that could not be executed as one wished could lead to a fatal disaster. Looking at Zheng Xiu, who had a disdainful expression because she had stabbed him, he laughed and said, "He did not just leave this sword energy in your body. Even now, you still have to rely on what he left in your body. Do you not feel it is ironic?" Bailey Sushiwa's words had double meanings. Anyone who knew of Zheng Xiu and Wang Jingming's past knew that such words were crude for someone of Bailey Sushiwa's status. But at this time, facing an enemy, Bailey Sushua would use any move that could harm or infuriate the other. This method of his had the desired effect. Zheng Xiu was completely furious. When all those who dare to mock me are dead, no one will dare to mock me. The fury in her eyes burned wildly, and her hair danced wildly behind her like countless poisonous snakes. The tips of her hair burned with white sparks, and even her perfect face became ferocious. Her extreme anger caused the true essence in her body to violently expand without restraint. In an instant, with her as the center, many pale, white stars appeared in an area of several thousand feet. The stars were speckled, as if the entire starry sky had been drawn down. In this area, other than these cultivators, all living beings quickly died. The flowers and grasses withered to ash. Even the insects underground silently turned to soil. Even a cultivator like Huang Daoqin could not resist this kind of destructive and cold star energy. The surface of his skin and the flesh of his body felt an incomparable stabbing pain. Then, he subconsciously retreated. A silver light covered Zheng Xiu and Bailey Sushua at this time. His gaze was fixed on the two people in the dome of light. This was a godlike battle. Even a cultivator of his level could not interfere. The air was filled with a powerful presence. Bailey Sushiwe's expression grew grave. This presence did not lose to the cultivators of the Zhao sword furnace. While in the past battles with the Han and Zhao Wei, Zheng Xiu had never fought with her life on the battlefield. He did not doubt that a cultivator like Zheng Xiu, who had come out of Jiaodong Commandery, would not fight with her life on the line. A person like Zheng Xiu, once she lost her mind and exploded with all her power, would be terrifying. However, he did not hesitate at all and directly used a sword move that he had prepared long ago. His movements did not seem to have changed at all. He simply pulled his sword forward and attacked. When he completed such a natural and smooth movement, he had no sword in his hand. But when he stabbed, just like last time, a pure ice sword appeared in his hand. The tip of the ice sword erupted with a terrifying amount of life bond energy. Even though the primal energies of the universe were chaotic like hot porridge, there was still a clear sword hum. This sound was very pleasant to hear. It even drowned out all other sounds. 2 sword lights in the air. The 2 clear sword lights had an indescribable elegance. They cut through the starlight like 2 transparent wings flying. The edges of the transparent sword energy shone with 5 colors, with a warm and joyful feeling. Pan Rui and Huang Daoqian stopped breathing. The 2 of them were waiting for the result of this exchange of swords. But what they could not understand was that Bailey Sushiwe's attack did not have the feeling of mutual destruction. The power of this attack itself was not as strong as his previous attack. Bailey Sushiwe could easily use the powerful sword moves of so many sections. Why would he use such a move at this time? What they could not understand was that they saw Zheng Xiu's face suddenly turn ashen. The stars were trembling. This meant that her emotions were fluctuating violently. A cracking sound was heard. These 2 sword lights cut a hole in the starry sky formed by the light of the stars. It was just that this scene, which seemed as calm as a piece of paper, actually caused an unimaginable wave of power. The motionless palaces around them suddenly shattered, and even the palaces further away resounded with the sound of countless waves crashing against each other. Countless cracks appeared in the ground under Zheng Xiu's feet. In the next moment, the space behind her seemed to have been torn apart. Her entire body was sent flying backward, and the aftershocks from her body directly smashed into the study behind her. The courtyard where she often stood, the long table in the study behind her, and the wall behind her all exploded into pieces. Her body flew backwards among the rubble. Many wounds appeared on her porcelain body, and blood soaked her grand and dignified robes. Pan Rui and Huang Daoqian could not understand. The cultivators in the surroundings who were pushed back by the energy were even more shocked. They did not know why it had become like this. In that instant, Zheng Xiu should have been the one to win. This result was like a violation of the rules of power itself. Match made in heaven. Do you not find it ironic to lose to the sword movie created for you? Bailey Sushiwe's voice sounded, accompanied by the sound of wind coming from his lungs. Many people immediately understood why it was like this. Ever since the war against Chu in the spring, Zheng Xiu had been attacking her heart, but Bailey Sushiwe was the same. Flying wing to wing. Not only was the name of this sword technique pleasant to the ears, it also contained the beautiful pursuit of a lifetime of mutual understanding and love. At least, this was the case for Wang Jingming in the past. In his eyes, Zheng Xiu was his perfect partner, the object of his beautiful imagination. So he believed her and trusted her. He felt she would be the same. No matter what Zheng Xiu thought, he was so sincere. So he created this sword move to represent his feelings and expectations for the future at the time. Bailey Sushiwe used this sword move to attack Zheng Xiu's heart. From the start of the exchange of words, Zheng Xiu's emotions would fluctuate because of his appearance and words. He knew this move would succeed. There was a loud thud. When Zheng Xiu's feet landed on the ground, the luxurious shoes on her feet exploded one after another. Although she forcefully controlled her body and did not fall to the ground, the moment she landed, she spat out several mouthfuls of blood. She did not stop vomiting blood, and even her body bent over. All the cultivators on the outside knew that Zheng Xiu's body was extremely weak, but at this time, no one dared to attack first, because everyone knew that Bailey Sushua still had the ability to attack. Chapter 645. Bailey Sushua took a deep breath. The vital energy in his body quickly swelled and was about to surge out along his meridians. This was the chance he had waited 15 years for. Using this spring expedition, with Ding Ning and himself as bait, he finally had the chance to attack Changling's imperial city. The previous exchange of words, all his attitude was to use that flying wings pair. Flames started to burn in his cold eyes. Since he had successfully used this attack and seriously injured Zheng Xiu and was on the verge of killing her, then he did not want any more accidents and did not want to waste any more time. At this time, his vital energy was greatly expended, and many hidden wounds appeared in his body. But this was when his sword essence was at its peak. All the previous exchanges were part of his plan and were all within his calculations. Now, the next attack to kill Zheng Xiu was his true self, the strongest desire from the depths of his body. The killing intent that had accumulated for 15 years was released. There was no true coldness in the air, but the cultivators closest to the hall froze due to this tangible coldness. In the distance, many people looked at Huang Daochen. At least, at this time, only this present sect master of Lingshu Sword Gate could save Zheng Xiu's life. Huang Daochen's heart was extremely bitter. He could only attack, even though he knew that if he used all his power against Bailey Sushua, he would not be able to protect himself, and would likely be killed by Pan Rui. A ring slipped off his wrist and flew out of his hand. This was a dark golden ring. It looked simple and unadorned, and there weren't even any runes on it. Yet when his vital energy flowed out of his hand, this black gold ring turned into a round door. The dark golden light emanating from the ring turned into a mirror that floated in the air. The mirror floated a few feet in front of Huang Daochen, but it seemed to communicate with another world. A grand sound was emitted from the light, and an aura that was completely different from this world gushed out crazily. The radiance emitted by this ring was no more than a foot in diameter, but this sound and this aura gave everyone the feeling that a massive monster beast from another world was about to forcibly squeeze its way out of this ring. Pan Rui was covered in blood. Her meridians were broken in several places. But at this time, she stepped forward without thinking and dodged multiple flying swords attacking her. She forced out all the remaining power in her body with a muffled grunt. A green leaf appeared out of thin air and stuck close to the dark golden ring. This green leaf was very weak, yet it covered this door. Bailey Sushua did not care about these things. In the past many years, he had never felt that Lingshu Sword Gate could stand on the same level as Min Mountain Sword Sect, even in the era when Lingshu Sword Gate had 5 sections. Because in his view, some of Lingshu Sword Gate's methods of communication and concealment were like stealing light, stealing some Realm 8 power in advance. Using this method, they opened a hole and drew out some energy that only Realm 8 could communicate with. If the prodigy used his energy to research this method and did not truly reach Realm 8, the legacy he left behind was not the true path to Realm 8. Then the peak power of this sect for many generations only stopped at the peak of Realm 7. As to now, he did not care about Huang Daochen's power. He just wanted to kill Zheng Xiu. As to whether he would die after this attack, that was not something he cared about. He just wanted Zheng Xiu to die. The killing intent turned into a golden sword light, dazzling, majestic, and filled with the presence of a king looking down on the world. This was the Phoenix Breaking Sword of the Phoenix Breaking Sword Manual. This was the sword manual that Yuan Wu cultivated. Bailey Sushua was not using this sword to purposefully express more meaning, but because this sword move was one of the strongest in the world. A true king would only follow their own wishes and never compromise. He was such a king, so the sword essence of his attack was even more perfect than Yuan Wu's. Zheng Xiu hesitated at this moment. She raised her head slightly, but gave up on using the sword that was floating in the sky with the sparks. She decided to gamble on her own fate. Her eyes turned a deep blue. The sound of an enormous building collapsing came from her body. This was the sound of a true collapse. It was the Jade Palace deep in her energy sea that was collapsing. For ordinary cultivators, this was destroying their own cultivation, stimulating all their potential, and giving the last attack as a cultivator. The air in front of her turned the same blue as her eyes. In Bailey Sushiwa's perception, a deep sea appeared. The energy that came out of her body and the energy that she drew in brought the pressure and weight of the deep sea. But Bailey Sushiwa did not think that he could stop this attack. Because Yuan Wu's attack could even cut off a mountain peak opposite Deer Mountain, much less a sea. The golden sword light followed his perception and gaze, and easily cut through the blue sea. This sea was cut apart. The azure primordial chi was ignited by the golden sword light, splashing out in all directions, becoming the most spectacular fireworks. Zheng Xiao retreated 70 to 80 feet in this moment. While the golden sword light was still wrapped by the softness of the deep sea and had not caught up to her body, in her energy sea, spiderweb-like cracks appeared on her porcelain white skin. The remnants of the collapse of the energy sea Jade Palace seemed to cause her meridians and body to collapse. Those cultivators who could sense but could not interfere in a battle of this level were shocked. In their minds, the scene of Zheng Xiao, the mistress of Chongling, shattering like porcelain appeared. The fireworks were blooming, the energy was burning fiercely, but the imperial palace was almost completely silent. All of Chongling seemed to be prepared to welcome the death of its mistress. The world seemed to be welcoming an era without this Jiaodong commandery woman who controlled everything. But at this time, inside her fragile porcelain body, there were sounds of energy rubbing against each other. Pew, 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 pew. Many of the meridian points in her body surged outwards with white waves. Bailey Sushiwa's breathing suddenly stopped. This was a kind of extremely pure energy blooming. This pure energy with an indescribable sense of holiness and vitality, after charging out of Zheng Xiao's meridian points, bloomed on her body like white lotus flowers. Her expression was mad and vicious, in pain and violence. However, the white lotuses that covered her body were holy and radiant. This contrast was incomparably strange. Chapter 646. Bailey Sushiwa's gaze flashed violently. In this moment, he thought of countless possibilities, and then he understood the reason. So the spirit lotuses born from so many spirit veins in Chongling have such an effect. He looked at Zheng Xiao and said, "The white lotuses that covered Zheng Xiao only appeared for a moment. The energy filled with an indescribable sense of holiness and vitality quickly retreated into Zheng Xiao's body and was absorbed by her body. Astounding spirit energy flowed through Zheng Xiao's body, repairing her damaged blood veins at a terrifying speed and gluing her almost shattered body together in such a simple and crude way. If Ding Ning, Li Shixing, and the others were here, they would feel a sense of déjà vu. This smell was very similar to the fountain of youth in the Mountain of Ancestors. It was not just healing, it was a holy smell that could reverse life and death. Almost all the cultivators in Chongling knew that after Yuan Wu ascended the throne, Zheng Xiao used all kinds of methods to draw the remaining spirit veins of Chongling into the depths of the imperial palace and into her study. The conflict between Shui Wangshu of White Goat Cave and her had arisen because of the spirit veins of White Goat Cave. Everyone knew that the spirit veins she had drawn and had given birth to spirit lotuses that had matured and formed lotus seeds. But no one knew the use of the lotus seeds formed by the spirit lotuses bathed in spirit energy and the profound starlight she had drawn in through formations. Many cultivators speculated that they were used to make medicine and would be crucial in advancing from Realm 7 to Realm 8. Of course, some people thought that this was related to healing. But just like the fountain of youth and the flower of longevity in the Mountain of Ancestors, this was an astounding thing that had never been recorded in the cultivation records. Who would have thought that the Jade Palace and the energy sea could be repaired after shattering? Zheng Xiao did not respond. She had won the gamble. Her body had not completely disintegrated, but the pain of having her body almost shattered and reborn could not be imagined by those who had not experienced it personally. The spiritual energy that flowed through her body was like a giant hammer, constantly hammering her flesh and bones into mud, and then reforming them. Bailey Sushue took a deep breath, just a thread away. Or rather, he had killed Jing Xiao, but she had come back to life. At this time, he sensed an exceptionally dangerous presence approaching. If he did not leave, he would stay in the imperial palace forever. However, he still said something to Jing Xiao. If you had not set up the formation, and these spirit veins were not being irrigated and merged by the star fire falling from the sky, well, I fear that these lotus seeds could have been used by Yuan Wu. When he said this, a majestic force fell from the sky towards him. This power was very ethereal. It gave people a pure and bright feeling, but it was abnormally heavy. It was like an invisible mountain was pressing down. Let's go. Bailey Sushue glanced at Huang Daochen behind him. His figure appeared next to Pan Rui. Pan Rui could no longer stand steadily. She fell to the ground in the pool of blood on her body. Naturally, he pulled her into his arms. There was a loud bang. A shrill dragon roar sounded in the sky. The nether dragon circling in the sky charged down like a black meteor. Its body smashed into the invisible mountain. At the same time, countless flying swords and seal weapons appeared on its body. Its hard scales shattered in many places. The shattered scales and black dragon blood rained down. Huang Daochen and Bailey Sushue's gazes met. His breathing stopped. He was the steadiest person in Lingshu Sword Gate. At this time, he understood the other's meaning from Bailey Sushue's proud and irrefutable gaze. Other than Bailey Sushue, Min Mountain Sword Sect had many powerful grandmasters, like Yintai Guanjian, Qin Yaoyin, and the Butcher Gungren. If he still tried to stop Bailey Sushue and Pan Rui from escaping, then even if Bailey Sushue died here, and he was the only one left, Lingshu Sword Gate could not stop Min Mountain Sword Sect's revenge. So he stood there, speechless, and watched in silence. Bailey Sushue and Pan Rui's figures appeared on the Nether Dragon's head. The Nether Dragon roared again. As it charged into the sky, its body was hit by many flying swords and seal weapons again. Pieces of scales and flesh fell down. When the scales and flesh fell to the ground, they created waves of cold air. Large snowflakes floated down from the sky. The black, cold energy obscured the cultivator's senses. This nether dragon was about to turn into a black shadow in the sky and escape Chongling. But at this time, the terrifying presence that Bailey Sushue sensed finally reached the Imperial City. There was a loud rumble. A figure shot out of the Imperial City like a meteor, breaking through the cold air and snow into the sky. In front of this figure, there was a sword piece that looked like a piece of wood, or rather, it was a piece of wood. Under the sky that all the cultivators were looking up at, this sword piece and his body appeared extremely small in comparison to the Nether Dragon. However, the energy surging from his body and the power this sword piece carried, in the perception of all cultivators under the sky, was exceptionally great. This sword blade slashed down at the Nether Dragon. The sword energy and the Nether Dragon's body collided and gave off a metallic sound. In the next moment, a rainbow appeared in the sky. The rainbows of the world were red, orange, yellow, green, indigo, blue, and purple. But this rainbow was mainly a blinding gold, mixed with white, black, bronze, and other colors. The gold was suffocating pure lightning, and the white and black colors came from inside the Nether Dragon's body. It was the light given off by the energy in its bones, flesh, and meridians. All the cultivators looking up at the sky were shocked, speechless. That cultivator, who shot into the sky like a meteor, stepped on the void. He cut off the Nether Dragon's head with one blow and reached out to take the dragon's head into his hand. Everyone knew the identity of this cultivator the moment the sword shard released the terrifying astral lightning. He was Yishina, one of the top cultivators of the Bazin Kendo ground in the past. At the Deer Mountain Conference, he had turned the tables and killed many of the strongest grandmasters in the world. The Peach God Sword, one of the strongest swords of the Bazin Kendo ground, had been shattered by Yuan Wu in order to cooperate with his act. But this sword piece seemed to be the essence of the Peach God Sword. It still perfectly merged with his life bond energy and carried his power. Black dragon blood fell from the nether dragon's severed neck like a waterfall. Yishina pressed his lips together. He once again enjoyed the pleasure of being the center of attention and turning the situation around. Yet his brow still furrowed slightly. He looked around at the streets of Chongling below. While this blow had killed the nether dragon, Bailey Sushue had still taken Pan Rui away from his sight and perception. Chapter 647. Is it really so hard to kill a person? Yishinha thought of the news from the Qinchu border. Thinking of how even Yi Xiao had used his life to trap that person, he felt that what Yuanwu said was true, adding on that he had calculated thousands of times when he attacked. But Bailey Sushue still escaped from his perception. He sighed inexplicably and said in his mind, "The enormous body of the nether dragon fell from the sky and smashed into the imperial palace. The last cold energy from the body swept through the entire imperial city. The imperial palace was in ruins. Many cultivators trembled in the cold currents, not knowing where to go, as though they were in a dream. Can you escape?" Pan Rui looked at Bailey Sushue, who was supporting her with one hand and moving through the streets, and said softly with difficulty, "Yes." Bailey Sushue simply and confidently said one word. Pan Rui sensed the energy and blood flowing through his body, and her mouth grew bitter. "If this continues, you will be crippled." Bailey Sushue knew better than Pan Rui that burning his life bond energy like this would cause his energy sea to dry up. Most of his meridians had been damaged in the previous battles. In his perception, they were burning and shrinking like lampshades. But his expression was still so calm that Pan Rui could not understand. Hearing Pan Rui's words, he just looked forward and responded, "Crippling is just a question of whether or not I can use my sword. As long as I am alive, whether or not I can use my sword is still useful." Pan Rui admitted that his words were reasonable, but she could not help but shake her head slightly and said, "There is also Huang Jinwei." Not just Huang Jinwei, but Xin Xian. Bailey Sushue glanced at her and said. Pan Rui said, "I do not mean that." "You do mean that," Bailey Sushue said. "You say Huang Jinwei because you feel that we cannot hide from him. He has the ability to find us, but he will not." Pan Rui stilled. Why? She could not understand these words at all. That mountainous power clearly came from Huang Jinwei. In the last moment, it was Huang Jinwei and Yi Xinhe working together to kill Bailey Sushue. Bailey Sushue had paid the price of the nether dragon to escape Yi Xinhe's perception. If Huang Jinwei was like Yi Xiling and stood on the side of the Bazinkendo ground, then just now, why did he act? His attack did not have much killing intent. Bailey Sushue said casually and naturally, "I could feel it." Pan Rui was stunned for a long time. She could not help but ask, "Xin Xian?" When he returned to Chongling from the Mountain of Ancestors, I knew which side he was on. Bailey Sushue said naturally. As a favorite that Zheng Xiu raised, he should have appeared earlier than Yi Xinhe and Huang Daoqian. He did not appear because he either fled or went to do other things. Pan Rui took a deep breath. She looked in shock at Bailey Sushue and finally understood what preparations he had made to complete such an assassination. Just one step away. No one had thought that those lotus seeds would have such an effect. Each year, Jiaodong Commandery would find many spirit herbs from overseas, but many of them are missing. Now, I think that she added them to those spirit veins, she said thoughtfully. Bailey Sushue's calmness and naturalness caused her to not care about her surroundings. For her, she was not in a chaotic city filled with danger at any moment, but chatting with Bailey Sushue in an unusually calm place in Min Mountain. Thanks to Wang Jingming, she obtained some things left behind by the Yu dynasty, Bailey Sushue said disdainfully. She herself does not have such skills. The Yu dynasty? Pan Rui felt that her knowledge had become shallow as she spoke with Bailey Sushue. At the same time, she felt her eyelids were heavy. Her body was especially cold and even numb. She knew that Bailey Sushue was purposefully talking to her about things that cultivators would find fascinating. so that she would not fall asleep and never wake up. Since the Yu dynasty was defeated in the end, and the once invincible Yu emperor was killed in the imperial city, the 9-death silkworm fell outside. Of course, there was a powerful opponent that could destroy the Yu dynasty. Bailey Su Shui continued naturally. While these are almost not recorded in the records, they are things that can be thought of without guessing. What Wang Jingming received when he started cultivation was not the legendary Yu emperor's inheritance, but the enemy of the Yu dynasty, some of the inheritances of the sect that destroyed the Yu dynasty. In the remains of that sect, other than the methods of that sect, there are many things from the Yu dynasty imperial palace, including the 9-death silkworm. The reason I know this is because I am Wang Jingming's best friend, and I even received some things from the Yu dynasty, including this nether dragon. Bailey Su Shui sensed Pan Rui's shock, but he still continued naturally. Zheng Xiao was once Wang Jingming's lover, and she naturally knows many secrets of the Yu dynasty. Can the 9-death silkworm really bring the dead back to life and allow people to be reborn? Pan Rui's body trembled. This extreme shock drove away her sleepiness and forced her to focus. Bailey Su Shui shook his head simply. I do not know. Pan Rui tried to widen her eyes to look at him, her expression like an innocent young girl. Up until now, maybe Zheng Xiao still hates him, hates that he did not tell her the secrets of the 9-death silkworm. In reality, he did not even tell me, because in his view, the 9-death silkworm is very dangerous and unpredictable. Bailey Su Shui said coolly, this kind of thing that has great temptation but does not know the consequences, the best method is to not touch it. So even though I did not have any more contact with him, but I think with his personality, he should have tried it when he was about to die. As to the result, only he knows. You are really not vexed and disappointed at all. Pan Rui looked at Bailey Su Shui, who appeared calm from beginning to end, and could not help but ask. I have kept most of her power in Chongling and Min Mountain. Also, I finally understand the use of the spirit lotus that grew out of her spirit spring. I also know many people's enemies. In other words, she likes to keep a trump card. This time, I know all of her trump cards. Also, after this battle, how will she and Yuan Wu interact? Even if he did not kill her directly, what do you think her situation will be? Bailey Su Shui narrowed his eyes slightly and said softly, in my view, the situation is developing in our favor. Right now, I do not understand two things. Why is Yi Xinhe helping her so wholeheartedly? And why does she have the confidence to destroy the Chu dynasty quickly? Chapter 648. Pan Rui's wounds were extremely serious. If she was not forcefully stimulated, she may close her eyes and die. At this time, Bailey Su Shui was talking to her about the most stimulating things in the world of cultivators. Her wounds caused her to feel that the sunlight was especially blinding and dizzying, but her thoughts were still clear. Many people will have their own choices. Why think of Yi Xinhe? But she still could not understand Bailey Su Shui's thoughts at this time. Compared to Zheng Xiao's plan to destroy the Chu, why Yi Xinhe would stand with Zheng Xiao was an insignificant matter. Also, so many people in the Bazin Kendo ground had betrayed back then. How could Yi Xinhe be missing? Many things do not happen alone. Many people and matters are connected. Especially in this world, it is always driven by some of the top people. If you think about these people, you will find the connections. Just like why she says she can quickly destroy the Chu dynasty, it is related to those important people in the world. Bailey Su Shui was very satisfied with her present state. Min Mountain Sword Sect was not just the strongest sword sect in the world, but also the strongest medicine master in the world. As long as she did not die in Chongling, he could guarantee her survival. Up until now, Huang Jinwei had not detected him. This meant his guess was correct. Huang Jinwei did not firmly stand on Zheng Xiao's side. Regardless of whether he felt that he had a reason to do so, or out of pure sympathy, or because he was dissatisfied with Zheng Xiao because of Mo Shouqing's death, Huang Jinwei did not want him to die in Chongling. He breathed slowly, trying to suppress some of the rampaging energy in his body. He said, while the Bazin Kendo ground has many traitors, and the collapse of the Bazin Kendo ground is due to internal division, Yi Xinhe is different from those people. He is the master of the peach god sword. Wang Jingming is unruly and skilled in conquering the world, but has no interest in ruling the world. The last flower sword master Yin Xinlan and the others only like pure battle and are cultivation fanatics. The peach god sword is one of the strongest swords of the Bazenkendo ground. From a certain point of view, Yi Xinhe, who received the inheritance of the peach god sword, is one of the successors to the sect master of the Bazenkendo ground. Also, looking at the people of the Bazenkendo ground, if nothing unexpected happens, he will be the next sect master of the Bazenkendo ground. He paused and then said, people like Liang Lian were originally cart drivers and had a hard time rising up. Gu Huai is strong, but he is not like Yi Xinhe, Lin Zhujiu, and the others. He wants to become the sect master of Lingshu Sword Gate. This is clearly motivated by benefits. But why is Yi Xinhe doing this? If he is of one mind with Wang Jingming and the others, and the Bazenkendo ground helps the Qin dynasty unify the world as the sect master of the Bazenkendo ground, he may have a higher status than the Yuanwu emperor. Now that he has helped Yuanwu and Zhengxiu destroy the Bazenkendo ground, even if his position is equal to the two ministers, it is still low. So this is what I do not understand. You have been good to Sun Xian and given him everything he can get. Why did he not come when he should have? In the shattered imperial palace, Yi Xinhe walked in front of Zhengxiu, whose spirit energy was still swelling. He said, I do not understand. Can you understand? There is nothing I do not understand. Zhengxiu had recovered her calmness and said, I can give him what he wants, but he does not dare to accept it. This means that there is a problem with what he gave me in exchange. He came back with the heaven-replenishing divine art. If there is a problem, it is that wine shop youth. So if I have guessed correctly, the heir to the 9-death silkworm trapped by Yi Xiao should be that wine shop youth. Because only the heir to the 9-death silkworm can make him feel that he can give him more. Yi Xinhe laughed self-deprecatingly. So after all this time, this person has always been in Chongling, right under our noses. What do you want to do? At this time, Yi Xinhe's expression turned cold. He turned and shouted. On the path behind him, a cultivator from the palace was flying over. Usually, the approach of a cultivator like this would not cause such an intense reaction. But it was different now. Zhengxiu's state was so terrible that some cultivators who did not pay attention could kill her. The palace cultivator sensed tangible murderousness and stopped in shock. He bowed and said, Official Shun sent a secret letter. Really? Yi Xinhe expressionlessly reached out and took the secret letter from the palace cultivator. But after quickly reading the contents of the letter, the slight disdain at the corner of his mouth quickly froze. Zhengxiu's brows furrowed deeply. She did not have a good feeling. Sun Xian was a new powerhouse of Chongling, but everything came from her. She could take it away at any time. But this did not change the fact that Sun Xian was a powerful cultivator. Sun Xian alone was nothing, but if he truly worked together with Min Mountain Sword Sect, it was worrisome. Also, she knew that Sun Xian had stayed in a place like the Great Floating Water Prison for many years. In order to achieve his goal, he would do many things that Bailey Su Xue would disdain to do. He took Hu Hai away, Yi Xinhe said directly. His voice was not soft. Quite a few cultivators standing guard outside the palace heard him. Immediately, heavy breathing could be heard. Hu Hai was the second imperial son. His personality was not as gentle as Fu Su's, and his performance in cultivation was not as good as Fu Su's. His reputation among the people was not as good as Fu Su's. So for this dynasty, he was almost non-existent. Even if he was taken to the Deer Mountain Conference, he would be ignored. But now it was different. Fu Su was being held hostage by the heir to the 9-death silkworm, and also in the formation. If something happened to the second imperial son Hu Hai, then Yuanwu and Zhengxiu would temporarily have no descendants. This dynasty would lose all the heirs that could inherit. What was even more worrying was Yuanwu and Zhengxiu's emotions. They could bear the price of losing one son, but could they bear the price of losing all of their sons? A dog that barks is not terrifying. A silent dog is the best at biting people. Zhengxiu was silent for several breaths of time before she said this expressionlessly. Then she looked at Yi Xinhe and asked, What does he want? Yi Xinhe glanced at her and said, He only said that he wants one person to live. He only said that he would let one person live, but he did not say who it was. Does that mean that I cannot directly kill any of those who are currently fleeing? I have to keep them alive and wait for him to make the exchange? Zheng Xiao rarely laughed, but at this moment, she was so angry that she started laughing instead. Yi Xinhe waited silently. He did not care how vicious Shun Xian's request was. What was important was how Zheng Xiao chose. The beginning of compromise means continuous compromise, Zheng Xiao said coldly and slowly. I refuse. Chapter 649. Her face was cold, but her hands were trembling uncontrollably. She felt that she had become exactly the same as Yuan Wu. What made her heart cold was she had not expected so many people to stand on the other side. Only 3 of the 5 sects of Lingshu Sword Gate remained. Of the 3 sects, only Huang Daochen was on her side. Yi sect and Qi sect had both betrayed her. Ji Qingqing had betrayed her. Yi Sealing had betrayed her. Min Mountain Sword sect had betrayed her. Even Xin Xian and Pan Rui had betrayed her. In Chongling, she saw clearly that there were not many people who were not standing on the other side. But this kind of powerless and angry emotion only lasted for a short moment. After a few breaths, her heart became even colder and harder. Even if Shun Xian, that dog, had betrayed her, even if Bailey Sushua had charged into the imperial palace and was just one step away from killing her, even forcing her to use all her hidden pawns, Bailey Sushua had abandoned the Nether Dragon and left. She was certain that if she could stop the human butcher Gung Run and Bailey Sushua from meeting soon, then Bailey Sushua would not just be seriously injured and unable to recover in the short term. His cultivation would be crippled. Bailey Sushua was one of the people she feared the most, even more than that Donghu monk. But now, Bailey Sushua was crippled, and that Donghu monk was most likely crippled as well. And Yi Xiao, even a person like this, had fallen into her plan and was willing to die as a cage for the 9 death silkworm. What else could she not do? Official Xin Xian, what are you doing? You really do not look like the son of Zheng Xiao and Yuan Wu. Even Fusa looks more like you. Xin Xian coldly interrupted the words of the youth, who had woken up in the darkness. This youth was a prince of the Qin dynasty that he would usually kneel to, but at this time, he was in a worse state than almost all the prisoners he had encountered. He had even wet himself out of fear, causing this secret room to be filled with a foul smell. He slowly opened a box and placed the torture instruments of various sizes on the table in front of the metal chair the youth Hu Hai was sitting on. Hu Hai's body twisted like he was convulsing. As his body twisted, he gave a heart-wrenching scream. This black metal chair was specially made in the great floating water prison. Many parts of it had terrifying spikes. Zheng Xiao once used these torture instruments on me. From now on, I'll let you try them one by one. Of course, my methods will be better than those torture officers, because they were all taught by me. Xin Xian looked at this imperial prince who was terrified to the extreme. He smiled scornfully in the darkness and bared his white teeth. He was well versed in the ways of torturing people. He knew that the imperceptible fear and constant physical pain could even change a person's personality. He did not want to kill Hu Hai, but he was interested in changing Hu Hai. You have to bear with it. For an emperor, this kind of pain is nothing. If Fu Su doesn't come back, you will become the crown prince. In the future, the entire Qin dynasty will be yours. His smile was terrifying, but his voice was indescribably gentle. This is Chongling. You will definitely be found. My mother will make you beg for death. Hu Hai began to cry like a madman. Tears and snot crawled on his twisted face like earthworms. Threats are the most useless. The days are long. Do not be like this in the future, Xin Xian said calmly. Xin Xian said calmly and lightly, as if he was an elder teaching his most important student. This strangeness caused Hu Hai to stop crying, but his body continued to convulse. Xin Xian slowly picked up the first torture instrument and showed a hint of a smile. He slowly said, previously, in the great floating water prison, Many people in Chongling mocked me for being a water rat who only knew how to hide underground. But a water rat has its abilities. Even if I hide underground, I have enough patience. Also, you have to remember, to hide, you do not just need to dig a deep hole, but do not contact anyone. When you're an independent individual, completely isolated from the outside world, whether it's water, food, everything has nothing to do with the outside world. If you secretly bury yourself underground, no matter how strong someone is, they won't be able to find you. Hu Hai screamed like a madman. As he spoke calmly, Shen Xian had pulled out all the fingernails on his left hand and then quickly applied medicine to stop the bleeding. The great pain caused Hu Hai's body to slam against the metal chair. His body could not avoid being stabbed by the spikes on the chair. You deserve this. Your personality is cruel to begin with. When you were 13, because a servant accidentally broke one of your jade plates, you tied her up and smashed her to death with a rock. After that matter, all the powerful officials did not like you. Many people thought that it was fine if you killed her, but slowly smashing her to death with a rock was too cruel. But that matter caused you to lose the chance to compete with Fu Su and become the crown prince. Shen Xian calmly continued to torture and spoke into Hu Hai's ear. But this is only because you were born well. If you were born in a normal official's family or a normal rich merchant's family, you would have been imprisoned or executed for killing a servant girl like this. But you still do not know how to repent. Also, losing the position of crown prince seems to have caused your temper to worsen. You have done some things you should not have done. So much so that every time I see you in the court, every time I look at your white and insufferably arrogant face, I imagine the scene of you being tortured. Only now am I finally satisfied. This was a dark underground. Above the dark room, where Hu Hai was screaming like a madman, was a well. Above the well was a normal street. At this time, near this well, a cultivator from the palace was standing in confusion and unease. He looked around and felt the sunlight of Chongling was blinding. Right now, Chongling was still filled with killing. There were many enemies and many astounding important people fleeing. But without the astrology bureau, all of Chongling seemed to be blind. Those enemies seemed to have become invisible. Bailey Sushue was one of these invisible enemies. But he finally started to feel tired. Even Pan Rui, who he was supporting, started to sense many important meridians in his body turning to ash like burned bamboo and breaking. Qin Yaoyin should be reaching Yin Mountain soon. At this time, Bailey Sushue stopped. He stopped in an ordinary street. Many ordinary people could see him through the cracks in their doors. If Qin Yaoyin is not coming, then is Gongren coming? Pan Rui could not help but ask. Bailey Sushue shook his head. Then who? Pan Rui was in disbelief. In her mind, only those two people could take them out of Chongling. However, at this moment, a gentle mist drifted over and quietly enveloped them. Pan Rui immediately reacted and turned to look at Bailey Sushue. You knew Yi Sealing would come to save you? She stayed in Chongling and did not leave. Who else could she save other than me? Bailey Sushue's vital energy had been burned out, but he still said confidently. Chapter 650. I wonder how Chongling is right now. In the dust mountains outside Yin Mountain, Yintai Guanjin looked in the direction of Chongling and could not help but say, if no one comes, no matter what happens to Chongling, it has nothing to do with us, the black-robed youth Qianmu replied. The flow of time was distorted in the formation that Yi Xiao had set up at the cost of his life. The light was sometimes dark and sometimes bright under the interference of the energy of the dust mountains. It was impossible to distinguish day from night. There were many enormous soaring snakes and the corpses of other beasts around them. The soaring snakes were true serpents. Even though they were not as strong as Bailey Sushue's nether dragon, a part of their limbs that had been cut off by the sword energy fell to the ground like a mountain of flesh and gave people an unreal feeling. It was not just tiredness. The Donghu monk and Qianmu could not fight anymore. The one in the best state should be Yintai Guanjin. But feeling the thin vital energy in his energy sea, Yintai Guanjin, who smiled bitterly at Qianmu's words, did not even have the confidence to face a Realm 7 Grandmaster. He was not a talkative person usually, but because he did not have confidence, he could not help but speak. Ding Ning understood this feeling very well. In the many battles he had experienced, although some generals were not afraid of death, when the situation was extremely unfavorable and they felt that death was approaching, many of them would think of many things that they would not normally think of and would say some nonsense. Some people would even think of some things from their childhood and would even have some illusions in their days. Jiaodong Commandery's hundreds of years of foundation was so easily smashed by her here. In these dust mountains, the mist was twisted into strange shapes. The blood of some beasts was held up in the air by energy, and occasionally, large drops would fall down and bloom into blood flowers. Zhang Sun Qinxue was a person who liked cleanliness. She felt even more uncomfortable in this environment. She leaned against Ding Ning's body, her face unusually pale. She did not try to regulate her breathing and replenish her primordial qi. After repeated battles, her body's endurance had reached its limit. She was like a barren land that could no longer produce food. As long as she kills all of us, the entire world will be hers. However, if none of us die, then she will suffer a great loss this time. She looked at Ding Ning and said. She was more talkative than usual. However, she was very calm. Living and dying together represented unswerving loyalty. It was something that most people in the world would find difficult to do, but she had done it so easily. The roars of the flying snakes and some strange beasts echoed in the sky where light and shadow were disordered. Another wave of attacks was coming. The distant Jiaodong Commandery Imperial Envoy clearly did this on her orders. He did not care about how many of these soaring snakes were left. He carefully divided these soaring snakes and beasts into many batches. He did not allow them to use powerful sword moves to kill many at once, and did not give them a chance to rest. There were many powerful primal energies of the universe vibrations in the distant forest where the Jiaodong Commandery Imperial Envoy was. Clearly, there were Realm 7s fighting. The Grandmasters who came to help wanted to kill this Jiaodong Commandery expert who was controlling many soaring snakes, but clearly did not succeed. Do you still remember Su Yi Temple? At this moment, Ding Ning looked at her and asked. Zhang Sun Qinxue stilled and then nodded. Su Yi Temple was not the name of a temple, but the name of an old academician in Changling's imperial city. Back then, Yuan Wu had not been the only imperial son of the Qin dynasty. That old academician of Changling's imperial city, Su Yi Temple, supported another imperial son. So when Yuan Wu's wings grew and threatened that imperial son's cause, this old academician did a very direct thing. He personally assassinated Yuan Wu's strongest supporter, Wang Jingming. The result of that battle was that he was killed by Wang Jingming and Yin Xinlan, helping Yuan Wu kill people, and now the descendants of Su Yi Temple are coming to kill us. Is this not ironic? Ding Ning took a deep breath and said bitterly. Zhang Sun Qinxue's body stiffened slightly. She understood the meaning of Ding Ning's words. If this is the only way, then very good. Then she relaxed her body and said softly as she held Ding Ning's hand. At least this time, they could die together. The Donghu monk just sat with his eyes closed. Tantai Guanjian and Xian Mu heard the conversation between Ding Ning and Zhang Sun Qinxue, and their expressions changed. An extremely loud explosion rang out in the sky, completely covering the roars of the soaring snakes. Then, a huge column of smoke with flames fell from the sky at a terrifying speed like a real meteor. When this pillar of smoke appeared, the green grass soaked in blood on the ground seemed to be sucked of life, and quickly turned yellow. There was a muffled boom. This pillar of smoke hit the ground and caused the ground to shake violently. Yet when the shockwave visible to the naked eye spread out in the air, causing the dust mountains to tremble, Yantai Guanjian's eyes widened to their limits. There were true flames burning at the center of the impact. This was the result of a special kind of primal energies of the universe rubbing against the air, rippling with a terrifying presence. But there was no life in this kind of flame. The body of a cultivator, in a strange position, stabbed into the cracked pit like a sword. Under the strong impact, this cultivator's spine was broken into several pieces. His body looked like it had folded and was half as short as usual. Naturally, he could not survive. Ding Ning was also stunned. He was very familiar with the presence of this cultivator. It came from the line of the old academician of the imperial city. But he had not expected that when he sensed this cultivator, he had turned into a corpse on the ground. Another strange cyan shadow appeared in the sky where the primordial qi was fluctuating rapidly. The moment Tantai Guanjian saw this indigo shadow, his eyes filled with joy. But in the next moment, his heart turned cold. He said in shock, "Even you have come." The indigo shadow suddenly paused when it was close to the ground. It silently hovered for a moment and then softly landed. He wore the indigo robes of Min Mountain Sword Sect. When he saw this person's face, Zhang Sun Qinxue understood why Tantai Guanjian had such a reaction. Other than Bailey Sushue and Tantai Guanjian, Min Mountain Sword Sect had two other people that the outside world feared the most. The Butcher Gung Run, and Qin Yaoyin, who was known as the breeder of demons. This person's indigo robes were tattered, and he did not care about his appearance. It was Qin Yaoyin. Tantai Guanjian was not in Chongling, and had been very worried about the safety of Min Mountain Sword Sect and Bailey Sushue. But now, even Qin Yaoyin had come here. Then he did not dare to think. Qin Yaoyin nodded slightly to Ding Ning, Zhang Sun Qinxue, and the others. But he did not immediately respond, and looked up at the sky where he had come from. A few ferocious and enormous heads had just pierced through the ribbon-like clouds. Their dim yellow eyes were filled with cruel and bloodthirsty light. Chapter 651. Even though many of their kind had been killed by the cultivators on the ground, serpents were serpents. Starting from their ancient ancestors, they were existences at the top of the food chain. Even though they felt danger, their instincts caused them to look down on these food. Cultivators took in the spirit energy of the universe into their bodies. For them, the flesh of cultivators was sweeter and more delicious than ordinary beings, and more beneficial to the growth of their power. When they poked their heads out of the clouds, the serpents started to release large amounts of mist from their boulder-like scales. Their attack methods were not different from their previous kind. They would summon a true tide in the air. This method was not hard for a Realm 7 Grandmaster to deal with, but it consumed a lot of energy. Their scales were especially hard. Even if these serpents stayed motionless in the air, waiting for them to cut off their heads, each blow would consume large amounts of energy. Yet, looking at these serpents whose enormous bodies covered the sky, Qin Yaoyin just reached out and flicked out a wave of energy. This wave of air contained some peach-pink medicinal powder. The light in the eyes of the serpents immediately changed from cruelty and bloodlust to terror. In the next moment, these serpents did not spew out the power stored in their bodies towards the people below, but flew up in a panic. This 1,000-layered dust mountain was a sword formation that Yi Xiao had used himself, the sword slaves, and the many famed swords to set up. It allowed entry and not exit. These serpents flew in a panic through the dust mountain, but they were lost and could not find a way out. The surging energy of their enormous bodies collided with the power in the dust mountain, giving off loud bangs like giants ringing bells in the air. Taming is not as good as raising, as expected. Seeing these serpents get lost in the 1,000-layered dust mountain so easily, and thinking of his master's evaluation of these Min Mountain Sword Sect cultivators in the past, Qianmu could not help but shake his head. Then his gaze landed on the body of the cultivator from the line of the Imperial City Academician, whose spine had been broken into pieces. He used great effort to finally squeeze out some life bond energy from his body. A ball of black energy formed a small black gravestone at his fingertips. A hole appeared in the ground under the cultivator's body. An even larger gravestone rose up and then merged into the cultivator's body like a shadow. Then the cultivator's body sank into the hole in the ground. I had not expected you to have such powerful ghostly means. Qin Yaoyin looked at this black-robed youth and praised from the bottom of his heart. Qianmu's head was bowed. He did not have any pride, and even sadly corrected his words. "This is not my means. My master left it to me." Qin Yaoyin smiled generously. Looking at this junior who respected his teacher, his eyes were full of praise. "You came at the right time. This thing can be of use." Zhang Sun, Qing Yin Qianmu, Qin Yaoyin, Qing Yin. Qin Yaoyin stilled. It really was a cocoon. It looked no different from an ordinary cocoon, but there was no normal cocoon in the world that was much bigger than an adult's fist. The most important thing was that the silk that formed this cocoon was like thin strands of mysterious ice. The cold air it emitted caused the surrounding water vapor to form frost. "This is?" he instinctively asked. "Strictly speaking, this belongs to your Min Mountain Sword sect." He brought it out of the Min Mountain Sword trials. Because he sensed that it could consume nether cold energy to cultivate. "He gave it to me." Zhang Sun Qinshua looked at Qin Yaoyin and then Ding Ning and said. Qin Yaoyin immediately frowned. "That black ice worm?" He took the cocoon that Zhang Sun Qinshua handed over. Feeling the piercing coldness, even he felt disbelief. Yantai Guanjian was also stunned. Previously, he had sensed the coldness coming from Zhang Sun Qinshua's sleeve. But he had only thought that this was a kind of weapon of Zhang Sun Qinshua, or a presence that came from his cultivation method. He had never thought that such a powerful presence would come from such a strange cocoon. "I am also very curious." At this time, Ding Ning's voice sounded. He looked at Qin Yaoyin, who was frowning deeply, and asked seriously, "What arrangements are there in the belly of Min Mountain Sword sect? Or rather, what are you trying to do in there all these years? Just using some medicine to accelerate the growth. Maybe it can cause some bloodline mutations." After a pause, Ding Ning asked, "But some low-level beasts, no matter how they mutate, cannot be reborn like this black ice worm. Naturally, it can swallow suitable energy, especially the coldness of the Nine Hell King's sword. This is something that many of the strongest beasts in the cold abyss cannot do." Qin Yaoyin listened carefully to each of Ding Ning's words. He did not answer Ding Ning's question first, but asked, "When did this black ice worm start to form a cocoon? Did it change before?" "After I went to Donghu, this black ice worm grew a horn. At that time, it was not an exaggeration to say that it was a young frost serpent." Ding Ning looked at him and said, "When I went from Donghu to Yin Mountain, this black ice worm started to form a cocoon. So fast." Qin Yaoyin's expression grew solemn, and there was inexplicable shock in his eyes. Then he answered Ding Ning's previous question simply. "We raised a nether dragon." "Nether dragon?" Ding Ning could not help but stop breathing. Qian Mu may not have heard of many things about the Yu dynasty, and he did not feel great shock. But even Zhang Sun Qinshua could not help but widen her eyes. "We spent a lot of time using the geography of Min Mountain to create a cold abyss. Then we analyzed many secret records of the Yu dynasty and really raised a nether dragon." Qin Yaoyin did not beat around the bush and said directly, "This black ice worm is one of the previous attempts. It has some of the nether dragon's blood in its body. It is mainly used to observe its reactions and changes to some spirit medicines. It is not surprising that it can absorb some energy to cultivate. But its change is so great, it should be due to the Nine Hell King's sword. The Nine Hell King's sword is the coldest sword in the world. It should be related to the Yu Emperor and this nether dragon." When he said this, he glanced at Qian Mu. Everyone understood the meaning in his glance. This kind of energy inheritance was likely similar to the inheritance of Master Yin and Qian Mu. "What do you prepare to do by raising this nether dragon?" Ding Ning took a deep breath and asked. Qin Yaoyin was silent for a moment and said, "Enter the imperial palace and kill Zheng Xiao." Everyone was shocked. After a long moment of silence, Zhang Sun Qinshua spoke. "So at this time, Bailey Sushue should have gone to the Chongling Imperial Palace. If he succeeded, Zheng Xiao would be dead." Qin Yaoyin nodded. He could not help but look in the direction of Chongling and said softly, "I hope he can succeed." Chapter 652. Everyone here hoped that Bailey Sushue could succeed. But they did not have eyes that could pass through time, so they could not know everything that had happened in Chongling. So his plan is to use himself to attract most of Zheng Xiu's power to Min Mountain Sword Sect, and then he will use the Nether Dragon to enter the Chongling Imperial Palace. Ding Ning took a deep breath and said to Qing Yaoyin. Qing Yaoyin nodded. He looked at Yintai Guanjian, who still could not calm down, and said, "If everything goes smoothly, it should be like this. So Min Mountain Sword Sect does not need to leave anyone behind." Yintai Guanjian said gravely, "But a plan is a plan. Since he can use the Nether Dragon to enter the Imperial Palace and assassinate Zheng Xiu, and Yuanwu is not in the Imperial Palace, even if Min Mountain Sword Sect does not need to leave anyone behind, he should have taken more people with him." Qing Yaoyin looked at Yintai Guanjian and grimaced. He did not speak, but everyone knew that Yintai Guanjian's question was very simple. The rest of them knew the answer. What was hardest to deal with about Zheng Xiu was not her cultivation, but her schemes, her omnipresent eyes, and news from many different channels. If she could not confirm the whereabouts of Yintai Guanjian and Qing Yaoyin, she would not have started her trap, and Bailey Sushua would not have had a chance to enter the Imperial Palace to assassinate her. This trap had been set up by Bailey Sushua from the start, and not by Zheng Xiu. Bailey Sushua first had to give Zheng Xiu a chance to kill him, and then get a chance to assassinate Zheng Xiu. This was a very simple cause and effect. Yintai Guanjian's mind was in chaos due to concern. Of course, there is another important reason. Qing Yaoyin glanced at Ding Ning and Zhang Sun Qianxue. He said, because this place is likely as important to him as Chongling. Ding Ning had experiences that no one in the cultivation world had. He had a grand life that no one had ever experienced, so his mind was very calm most of the time. But when he heard Qing Yaoyin's words, his mind shook, and he even felt ashamed. Zhang Sun Qianxue could understand his feelings right now. From a certain point of view, she and Bailey Sushua were the same kind of people. Mistakes and misunderstandings have nothing to do with each other. The key is that you don't want to let your friends down, and your friends don't want to let you down. She looked at Ding Ning and said, "The people present, including the Donghu monk who was about to lose his cultivation, could be considered old people of Chongling. They had more or less been involved in the Bazin Kendo ground and Yuanwu's ascension, except for Qianmu. He was a true junior, and even his master, strictly speaking, was a grandmaster of the Bazin Kendo ground era, but he had not participated in that battle. So, Qianmu was not particularly interested in the past. His attention was more on the present situation and the strange cocoon in Qing Yaoyin's hand. Then what will happen to this cocoon in the end? He looked at the strange and powerful frost energy rippling on the cocoon and could not help but ask. No one is certain what it will become. Qing Yaoyin thought seriously and said, "I have been in Min Mountain for more than a decade. There is only one kind of black ice worm that can be used as a substitute for the Nether Dragon to test the reaction of some spirit medicines to the Nether Dragon. And of this kind of black ice worm, only this one has undergone such a change, and it coincidentally encountered the Nine Hell King's sword. But if I have to judge, if I have to make a guess, then it is most likely to become something similar to the Nether Dragon." Something similar to the Nether Dragon? Another Nether Dragon? This time, even Qianmu was shocked. While he was a junior, he had heard of the Nether Dragon that the Yu Emperor rode when he ruled the world in the past. In many legends, not just that terrifying, enormous Nether Dragon, even the 8 descendants of this Nether Dragon and serpents were given to 8 divine generals as steeds by the Yu Emperor. Those 8 divine generals smelted the weapons of all the experts in the world to create divine armor for themselves and their steeds. At the time, they were invincible symbols. All kinds of records clearly described one fact. The terror of the Nether Dragon was that while the primal energies of the universe it could summon were equivalent to peak Realm 7 and not Realm 8, the amount of primal energies of the universe stored in its body was much greater than ordinary Realm 7 Grandmasters. This was like a Realm 7 Grandmaster having an energy sea and meridians dozens of times larger than ordinary people. He could use some powerful sword forms as he wished, and did not have to worry about using up vital energy. He could fight one against many. Even more importantly, the Nether Dragon's physical strength and the density and hardness of its scales were unimaginable. It was born like the strongest armor. In the records, the rebel army of the 33 provinces that had fought against the Yu dynasty had lost countless experts before they finally killed the 8 divine generals, the Nether Dragon, and the Yu Emperor. The Yu Emperor's Nether Dragon has hundreds of years of cultivation, and is not something these young things can compare to. Looking at Qian Mu's shocked expression, Qin Yaoyin shook his head and said, "But with the help of the Nine Hell King's sword, this nether worm's transformation is unexpected. In the short term, this nether worm's appearance may be very different from the Nether Dragon after its transformation, and there may be a large difference in power. But in the long term, I fear it has more potential." After a pause, Qin Yaoyin explained seriously, "Because the Nether Dragon is the same as the strongest beasts recorded in the records of our cultivation world. Their cultivation method is the accumulation of time. Time may not change their vital energy, but it can cause their bodies to slowly grow stronger. Their armor will become thicker and harder, and their flesh and blood will become stronger. This is not like us cultivators who go up. To describe it crudely, it is like they grow horizontally." Qian Mu completely understood, but his mouth could not help but gape even wider. He was more shocked inside. Qin Yaoyin clearly meant that even if the thing hatched in the cocoon was not as strong as the Nether Dragon he had made in Min Mountain Sword Sect, its cultivation accumulation was faster than the Nether Dragon of Min Mountain Sword Sect. Then, as the years grew, the thing in the cocoon would be stronger than the pure-blooded Nether Dragon. In the past, the Yu Emperor had only had one Nether Dragon. It was thought of as the symbol of imperial power and appeared in many totems. But now Min Mountain Sword Sect had 2. He was a youth, so he could not help but temporarily forget his present situation. He could not help but imagine that if these 2 Nether Dragons grew up, then without the remaining Grandmasters of the Bazenkendo ground, just these 2 Nether Dragons and the people of Min Mountain Sword Sect would be enough to fight against Xiangling. Qin Yaoyin looked at the flash in the youth's eyes and easily saw what he was thinking. Then he shook his head. He knew that since Bailey Sushiwa needed to use that Nether Dragon as a shield to force his way into the Imperial Palace, that Nether Dragon would not be able to survive. Min Mountain Sword Sect's Nether Dragon came from the Imperial Treasury of the former Yu dynasty. It was a complete dragon egg, and the bones, blood, and crystal core of that Nether Dragon's body. If that Nether Dragon died, Nether Dragons would disappear from the world. As a cultivator who had spent half his life studying these things, he naturally felt some regret. But the cocoon in his hand was an absolute surprise. As they spoke, the soaring snakes of Jiaodong Commandery were still lost in the dust mountains. They did not dare to go down, but could not fly out. Their enormous bodies collided with the almost tangible energy in the air and gave off all kinds of terrifying sounds. At this time, the Jiaodong Commandery Imperial envoy outside found he could not control these soaring snakes. Suddenly, a sharp whistle sounded. The panicked and chaotic flying snakes seemed to have completely lost their minds. They became extremely violent and no longer collided in the air. Instead, they flew down toward Ding Ning and the others. Qin Yaoyin's expression did not change. He did not even look at the shadows falling down like pillars. He quickly took out a pill bottle and dripped all the medicinal liquid onto the cocoon in his hand. Chapter 653. Yantai Guanjian took a deep breath, looked up at the shadows of the serpents in the sky. These soaring serpents were hard to deal with, especially after the wind and rain they created and the enormous waves. The cunning Jiaodong Commandery people often used small beasts that were hard to detect. Because these beasts' energies were compatible with the wind and rain, they were deadly like the flying swords that cultivators hid. But he was not worried about the attacks of these beasts. He just needed to calm his chaotic emotions. Min Mountain Sword Sect had spent many years in the belly of the mountain to create a cold abyss suitable for young Nether Dragons to live in. They had successfully hatched the Nether Dragon egg from the treasury of the former Yu dynasty. This was an absolute secret that even Yantai Guanjian did not know. But he knew very well that Qin Yaoyin had reached Realm 7 20 years ago. In these 20 years, he had not spent his energy on the sword, but on studying medicine and the methods to make beasts mutate. Even if that nether dragon had successfully hatched 20 years ago, these 20 years were too short for a nether dragon. It was no different from a human infant. Since Bailey Sushua had started this scheme to use the nether dragon to enter the Chongling Imperial Palace, then Qin Yaoyin had spent so many years in the belly of Min mountain breeding beasts to test spirit medicines. He definitely had a way to make the nether dragon grow quickly. Qian Mu was a youth and had a strong curiosity about the unknown. He had no power to fight at this time and did not pay attention to the terrifying soaring serpents flying down from the sky. He looked unblinkingly at the cocoon in Qin Yaoyin's hand. The medicinal liquid dripping out of the pill bottle in Qin Yaoyin's hand was a bright vermilion red, so thick it seemed to be the result of melting some kind of jade. But it had astounding penetrative power. Without the help of Qin Yaoyin's vital energy, it easily permeated the cocoon. This was a very short process, but the wind and rain in the sky and the enormous bodies of the soaring serpents had arrived. Qian Mu looked at the leisurely Qin Yaoyin and Yintai Guanjian, who was still holding his sword. He couldn't help but think, no matter how fast the changes in the cocoon were, they could not deal with the present situation. Also, the changes were unknown. If no one acted now, were they really waiting for the soaring snakes to open their mouths and swallow them all? At this time, he suddenly sensed something unusual, and his gaze unconsciously landed on Qin Yaoyin's sleeve. However, this change happened even faster than his gaze landed. A sharp, whistling sound seemed to directly resound in his mind. A dark gold flame flew out of Qin Yaoyin's sleeve, unobstructed as it passed through the wind and rain, and landed on the head of the leading soaring snake. Compared to the soaring serpent's enormous head, this dark golden flame was like a raindrop falling on its forehead. However, with a puff, the soaring serpent's head and entire body shook violently as if it had been smashed by a huge hammer. Then, a mist of blood erupted from its forehead and lower jaw at the same time. This soaring snake did not die immediately. Its enormous body moved like a mountain in the wind and rain. The primal energies of the universe coming out of its body immediately formed multiple enormous waves that exploded in the air. The wind and rain were chaotic, and the chaotic and shapeless waves splashed everywhere. A ball of water landed on Qian Mu's body and soaked his black robes. He widened his eyes, but his pupils violently contracted. He could sense that the dark golden flame seemed to be a living creature, but he was unable to clearly see what it was. What is this? Six-winged golden cicada, naturally one of the fastest insects in the world with the toughest bodies. As Qin Yaoyin's voice sounded, the dark gold flame had passed through the head of the second soaring snake. Large patches of blood bloomed in the sky, causing the stench of blood to grow thicker. The smell of blood from the explosion of their own kind finally made the other soaring serpents feel fear. They reacted in the most direct way, curling up their bodies and hiding their heads in their bodies. Whether it was their bodies or the yuan qi that enveloped them, they all turned into balls. There were meatballs in the wind and rain. Seeing the vicious serpent curl up into a ball, Qian Mu inexplicably found it funny. He could not help but laugh. At this time, everyone's attention returned to Qin Yaoyin's hand. There was a clear cutting sound coming from the cocoon he was holding. A small opening appeared in the cocoon made from countless cold threads. The living thing that bit through the threads directly consumed the cold threads. In the next moment, it gave off a terrifying presence. With a soft hum, the dark gold flame immediately reached Qin Yaoyin and stopped. This was a thumb-sized cicada. Its body seemed to be made from black gold. Other than having 6 wings, it looked no different from an ordinary cicada. But at this time, everyone could feel its wariness and hostility towards the thing in the cocoon. The thing that had not truly appeared in the cocoon clearly made it nervous. As to the soaring snake that had curled into a ball in the sky, its body was frozen in terror. The wild and bloodthirsty presence disappeared, and it did not even dare to release its energy. The wind, rain, and enormous waves in the air dissipated. They froze in the air, not knowing whether to flee or land. They did not even dare to flee. This was an innate fear of higher beings of the same race. For true nether dragons, these serpents were at most food. Everyone present looked at the broken cocoon in Qin Yaoyin's hand and knew that Qin Yaoyin's previous conjecture had not been wrong. Even if the thing coming out of the cocoon was not a true nether dragon, it was only different in appearance. No matter. Qin Yaoyin looked at the nervous cicada, nodded, and said calmly. This cicada seemed to be able to understand his words and his thoughts. It suddenly flew back into his sleeve. I need your vital energy. Qin Yaoyin looked up at Zhang Sun Qianxue. At the same time, he took out a silver pill bottle. As he carefully dripped out all the medicinal liquid in the bottle, he nodded at Zhang Sun Qianxue. Zhang Sun Qianxue looked at his gaze and understood what to do. She forced out some life bond energy from her body and wrapped the medicinal liquid into the cocoon. The cocoon in Qin Yaoyin's hand suddenly jumped. This was a feeling of joy. In the next moment, with a pop, a wave of energy came out, and the bulging cocoon immediately deflated like a piece of paper. This was the official appearance of a king who could make even a flood dragon submit to him. Everyone widened their eyes in anticipation. However, in the next moment, everyone was stunned. Zhang Sun Qianxue was silent for a moment and could not help but say, "You are very ugly." Chapter 654. Especially when the Yu dynasty had once ruled the world, the Nether Dragon, like the Yu Emperor, was a symbol of invincibility. In the records of the cultivation world, including the Nether Dragon that had appeared in Chongling that had not yet matured, other than terrifying, the accompanying adjectives were words like spectacular, grand, and so on. Its scales were like black crystals formed from thousand-year-old ice. Its claws were like cold steel tempered for tens of thousands of years. Even the lines on the edges of the scales were like natural seal scripts. In the perception of cultivators, it had a unique sense of beauty and profundity. In the earliest records, it was precisely because the earliest people had to fight against powerful beasts that they found the truth of cultivation from the heavenly Tao, and cultivators appeared. Many of the cultivation methods of cultivators and methods of using the world's yuan qi originated from studying these beasts. Therefore, in everyone's expectations, this new nether dragon that had broken out of the cocoon would be very small, but its appearance would be shocking. But the reality was astounding, because what came out of the cocoon was astoundingly ugly. In the past, the black ice worm was like a hairless caterpillar. But now, it could not be said whether the black ice worm was in the shape of a worm or a dragon. It did not have any scales on its body, but its skin had turned black and flashed with a layer of light. There was a pair of horns on its head, but these horns were deep red and very short. Compared to its body, they were too thick. It had grown a pair of fleshy wings and 4 claws, but on its back was a pair of short fleshy wings, a pair of shriveled front claws, and a pair of overly thick hind claws. All of these were extremely out of proportion with its body, not to mention that its tail was a long arrowhead. Putting aside the unique and powerful aura that was rippling from its body, just its appearance alone gave everyone the impression that its appearance was like a child trying to make a dragon out of mud, but was unable to do so at all. It was something that was casually pieced together by a child. "You are very ugly." Zhang Sun Qianxue's words still lingered in everyone's ears. She rarely spoke like this, so Ding Ning could not help but laugh. He looked at this nether dragon that was still in a daze and could not help but laugh. At least, it is not ugly everywhere. Its eyes are pretty. Qian Mu was the one who looked the most serious and did not even blink. He frowned as he looked at this nether dragon. Hearing Ding Ning's words, he could not help but laugh. This nether dragon's eyes were pure red, a bright red like rubies under the sun, bright and eye-catching. Just by looking at its eyes, it was indeed quite good-looking. However, with its dark skin and the pair of short and thick horns on its head, no matter how one looked at it, they couldn't help but want to laugh. When Qian Mu's laughter sounded, there was a soft hiss in the air. As it inhaled, all of the remaining cocoon threads were swallowed into its stomach. The coldness in its body grew thicker. Even now, it did not seem to be clear-headed and could not see the situation in front of it. But when its eyes met Ding Ning's, its body shook. It clearly still had the memories of the black ice worm. It was very afraid of Ding Ning and instinctively went to Zhang Sun Qianxue's side. It had come close to Zhang Sun Qianxue's body because of its natural fear of the 9-death silkworm in Ding Ning's body. But the moment it came close, it sensed a presence that made it feel close and satisfied. It immediately moved closer to him. While the young dragon was still in a state of confusion and panic, the two soaring serpents that were still alive in the sky had gone completely mad. This is a natural instinct in nature. They were so shocked by the presence of this infant dragon that even Jiaodong Commandery's control of their medicines and unique howls lost effect. They immediately wanted to flee, but could not leave this formation. In the next moment, they had thoughts of begging and submitting. The strange beasts hiding in the wind and rain that followed them didn't have the unique perception of these flood dragons when they encountered kings. They still wanted to pounce down to feed, but in the next moment, they were torn to pieces by the two soaring serpents instead. A king was a king. Qin Yaoyin frowned as he looked at this scene. He was not dissatisfied, but even he was shocked. This infant dragon was weak, but after merging with the energies of Zhang Sun Qianxue's 9 Hell King's sword, it had a presence that even the nether dragon he had raised in the cold depths of Min Mountain could not compare to. Could it completely subdue and rule these serpents? Could it be that only the nether dragon and the 9 Hell King's sword were the true Yu dynasty and complete? You could try to use thoughts on it. Qin Yaoyin took a deep breath and said to Zhang Sun Qianxue, things like it may not be able to completely understand our words, but they have their unique way of judging. They can judge what we need them to do from our minute movements and emotional changes. The longer they are together, the less likely they will misunderstand. Also, your 9 Hell King sword is something it naturally fears and feels close to like it is its commanding sword. So you do not need me to use any special medicines or methods to help you tame it. Zhang Sun Qianxue nodded. She looked at this infant dragon that wanted to stick to her, but did not dare. Then she looked at the two soaring snakes in the sky and said, since these two soaring snakes fear you so much, take them. This infant dragon looked at Zhang Sun Qianxue for a long time. Looking at her expression and gaze, it seemed to finally understand. In the next moment, to everyone's shock, it seemed to disappear from Zhang Sun Qianxue's side and appeared above the head of one of the soaring snakes. It was as fast as Yintai Guanjin's sword and left behind a belt of light in the air. As soon as it landed on the head of the soaring snake and the other soaring snake not far away softened at the same time, falling down powerlessly along with a gentle breeze and drizzle. In the next moment, this infant dragon suddenly returned to Zhang Sun Qianxue's side. It raised its head like it was asking for praise, its ruby-like eyes filled with excitement. Qian Hui put away his smile, and his eyes started to fill with seriousness. While this infant dragon was so ugly, he could not help but laugh. Just this ability to subdue the serpent dragon and just now's speed was astounding. How about we give it a name? He thought of how he already had a name and could not help but suggest. Yintai Guanjin looked at this infant dragon and could not help but worry. It was so small and black. Would it be called Little Black? A gift from the heavens, from a friend. Let's call it Friend Gift, Ding Ning said. No one had any objections. This infant dragon had originally been something he had brought out of the Min Mountain Sword trials and belonged to him. Also, everyone understood why he had given it such a name. This came from friendship. Bailey Sushue had worked hard to get a nether dragon because he was Wang Jingming's friend. He had killed Zheng Xiu to take revenge for Wang Jingming. It's here again. Qian Mu suddenly looked up and said. In the sky outside the Thousand Mountain Formation, the enormous sound of wind and rain and the hissing of the soaring snakes sounded again. Then what kind of gift is this? A gift of revenge? Zhang Sun Qianxue said with slight disdain. Hearing her words, Yintai Guanjin could not help but shake his head. He thought, if the people of Jiaodong Commandery knew that the soaring snakes they had spent hundreds of years accumulating were subdued and turned into the enemy's item after falling into this formation, what would they feel? Chapter 655. Outside the mountains, serpents appeared again, arriving with the wind and rain. A dim light flashed in the wind and rain, and then the wind and rain stopped abruptly. The four soaring serpents, like the two soaring serpents from before, curled up on one side, not daring to move, like sheep that were afraid of a pack of wolves. Thinking of how many generations of effort Jiaodong Commandery had spent to raise these soaring snakes, they were one of the true foundations of Jiaodong Commandery, and the most important chess piece that Zheng Xiao had placed on the battlefield. But now, Jiaodong Commandery was basically giving this foundation to them for free. This feeling was very good, looking at these soaring snakes that did not dare to move. Qian Mu felt some regret that Qing Yaoyin had come too late. Two groups of soaring snakes had died under Yintai Guanjin's sword. Thinking of how Zheng Xiao and Yuan Wu had stolen the Bazinkendo ground, he felt that this was karma, and Jiaodong Commandery was paying back their debt. If we can leave here, can we make these soaring snakes into mounts? He looked at Qing Yaoyin and could not help but ask softly. His tone was filled with humility and uncertainty. The humility came from thinking that everything he had came from his master, so he had no pride. In his eyes, Qing Yaoyin and the others were elders he had to respect, and uncertainty came from two aspects. One was the problem itself, and the other was whether they could leave here alive. Even if the soaring snakes of Jiaodong Commandery were going to become something in their hands and become a powerful aid, even the descendants of the Qin's ancestors had appeared. Naturally, there would be some unexpected experts that would appear. No one could predict what kind of battle they would face. But in his view, as long as they could take these soaring snakes out of here, since Bailey Sushue could use the Nether Dragon to enter Chongling's imperial city, then they could use the soaring snakes to do the same. The soaring snakes did not have powerful scales like the Nether Dragon, but at least they were true serpents. They could also fly high, surpassing the limits of many seal weapons and flying swords. Qing Yaoyin shook his head simply and said, "The flying snakes are naturally violent, especially when Jiaodong Commandery has been using medicine and whistling to control them. Their minds are greatly damaged, and they are even more violent than the flying snakes in the natural world. Of course, it can do simple tasks, but it is extremely difficult to make it a mount that can truly understand one's thoughts." After a pause, Qing Yaoyin looked at Qian Mu, who still found it hard to understand, and explained, "Using flying as an example, you can have it fly to one place, but it is almost impossible to have it deliberately hide its figure and sound while flying, especially controlling its energy vibrations." Qian Mu was silent for a moment, thinking this was a difficult problem to solve. Simply put, you can tame a shepherd dog to help you herd sheep, but you can't order it to do anything smarter. However, at this moment, Ding Ning's voice rang out. "We can't, but this friend bestowment might be able to." Qian Mu was stunned. Qing Yaoyin and everyone else stilled. Yusi was the name of this young nether dragon. This name was a bit strange, so everyone was not used to it. But this sentence seemed to make a lot of sense. They were not of the same kind as these serpents, so they could not communicate. However, this dragon whelp had already shown the ability to control them. Ding Ning took a deep breath. The most difficult thing to deal with Zheng Xiao and Yuan Wu was that they lived deep in the Chongling Imperial Palace. They had many armies and many powerful cultivators to protect them. Even if people of the same power as them came in front of them, they would have to face the situation of being outnumbered. Yet if many experts came in front of Zheng Xiao and Yuan Wu together, the result would be very different. But this was something that needed to be considered after leaving this place. Bailey Sushue had used many years to plan a chance to assassinate Zheng Xiao, and Yishao had used most of his life and everything he had to plan a chance to kill him. The dust mountains here were so stable and showed no signs of loosening. In the 1,000 dust mountains in his gaze, light and shadow were blurry. Some fine dust flickered with radiance, but occasionally flashed with the shape of swords. The world of cultivators changed rapidly, and there were countless opportunities and changes. Just like today, a black ice worm turned into a nether dragon, and the accumulation of Jiaodong Commandery over hundreds of years was being stolen without the outside world knowing. Some cultivators could not even break through Realm 4 in their entire lives, but some cultivators, because of an opportunity, broke through a barrier that had held them back for many years. Qin Dynasty's Longxi Commandery, Baiji Quarry. A man covered in dust put down the steel drill in his hand. After a long moment of silence, he slowly raised his head, straightened his body, and looked at the nearby river. Longxi Commandery's Baiji Quarry was one of the most important quarries of the Qin dynasty. The stone here was unusually strong and could be used to make city walls. At this time, the Qin dynasty and the Chu dynasty were fighting fiercely. Some of the forts on the border needed strong stone, and there were often dozens of empty ships waiting by the river. Quarrying stones, especially those that were exceptionally hard, was an extremely difficult job. The extreme fatigue and flying dust were extremely harmful to ordinary people. Therefore, most of the people who quarried stones in this quarry were prisoners who were punished with hard labor. The war was tense, and the officials in charge of this quarry were even stricter. Seeing that someone had stopped working and stood up to look at the scenery in a daze, an official's expression immediately changed. He walked toward the man with a long whip in his hand. This official was very fat. Longxi Commandery originally belonged to the Qin country. This small country had ceased to exist when the Qin dynasty destroyed the Zhao. But the Qin family was a prominent family and had great power in the local area. This official was surnamed Chun. While he spent his days with these prisoners in dust, it was a fat job. The families of some prisoners would often give him benefits for him to arrange some easy work. Over the years, he was treated like a local tyrant, which naturally increased his arrogance. Normally, he would scold and beat the prisoners he disliked, or whip them until they were dripping with blood. So when they saw this official walk out from under the awning, even if he was not targeting them, many people along the way started to tremble in fear. But the man was still in a daze, and did not even seem to hear the trembling reminders around him. The shadows of the official piled up in front of him. Seeing this man still disregard him, the official felt his authority was being challenged. "Do you want to die?" With a shout, he didn't even think before lashing out with his whip at the man's face. There was an explosion. The whip landed solidly on the man's forehead. Chapter 656. The whip in the fat official's hand was made from python skin. It was extremely tough and covered in fine scales. When it hit a person, it was no different from a metal whip. Also, the Qin dynasty revered martial prowess. This official was a member of a local prestigious family and naturally a cultivator. Usually, when he casually whipped the quarrymen in the thicker parts of their bodies, it would leave them with severe injuries. Now, this whip landed solidly on this man's forehead. The surrounding people, including the guards not far away, all felt their hearts skip a beat. They all wondered if this man would be beaten to death. In a quarry like this, where most of the prisoners were hard laborers, some punishment and torture was inevitable. But no matter what, it was difficult to explain if someone died and the population was lost. It was troublesome. Therefore, even the official with the surname Chen couldn't help but jump in fright. According to his original plan, no matter how dazed the man was, he would subconsciously dodge. This way, when his whip landed on the man's shoulder or chest, although it would be painful, it wouldn't be a big deal. He had not expected this man to not even react to the whip that was coming down at his face. The leather whip separated from this man's face. However, the following scene that entered everyone's line of sight was not bloody at all. This man's face did not have any scars, not even a white mark. Instead, there was a type of strange, faint radiance flickering on his face. Dust scattered around his face and hair, as if it was blown away by the force of the whip. Everyone was stunned. The official surnamed Chun was stunned at first, but in the next moment, his face turned pale and his lips began to tremble. He was a cultivator. Even though he was only Realm 3, he knew that this faint light came from the natural appearance of vital energy inside the body. Also, only powerful cultivators could cause their vital energy to unnaturally erupt when they suffered a heavy blow. "You," he said in a trembling voice, and then could not speak. While he did not know the names of these people by heart, he had at least seen them. How could there be a cultivator like this among all the prisoners and laborers in the quarry? Dust continued to fly out from the man's hair and skin. Under the faint glow on his body, the dust was dyed with a strange color, making it seem somewhat sacred. Not only the man's body and clothes, even everything within a radius of tens of feet around him had become unusually clean. Those fine stone powder were all gently pushed out by an invisible force. The man still had a dazed expression on his face. When he heard Scribe Chen's trembling voice, he was still in his own world. He only asked, "I just heard you guys talking. Fong Xiang of the Fong Marquis estate is dead?" The moment he spoke, the usually domineering official unconsciously took a step back in shock. The old nobility, Yi Shao, set up a formation behind Yin Mountain to lock up the heir to the 9-death silkworm. Fong Xiang of Fongho province killed his adopted son and then committed suicide. This is something everyone in the world knows. Something everyone in the world knows? The man shook his head. There was no joy or sorrow on his face. "I do not know." The official surnamed Chun found it hard to respond, but in the next moment he gained some courage. After all, this quarry was an important place for the military, and there were soldiers guarding it. In order to prevent these prisoners from causing trouble, there were many soldiers in the quarry, and many military weapons were set up. "Who the hell are you?" Thus, he gathered his courage and shouted. "Usually, you punish these people as you please. You are ruthless. Over the years, although I haven't seen anyone killed by you, I think there have been people who have died by your hands indirectly. Moreover, you whipped me today. If you break one of your arms, I will spare your life." After saying this, the man smiled bitterly and muttered to himself, "Since it's something that everyone in the world knows, it can't be wrong." The official started to tremble. Regardless of whether it was a finger or an arm, they were flesh and blood. Of course, he did not want to lose them. In the next instant, he made up his mind, as if he was about to nod and submit, but his eyes were filled with a viciousness as if he was on the verge of death. The true essence in his body crazily surged towards his feet, and with a violent sound, his body flew backwards like a rock thrown by a catapult. "You want to rebel?" At the same time, he shouted, wanting to escape this person's sight as quickly as possible. But all of his schemes, including his movements, the flow of vital energy in his body, and the reactions of the surrounding soldiers and the cultivators in the quarry, were too slow for this man who shone with strange light. They were not on the same level. When the official with the surname Chin thought about it, and before the vital energy in his body started to flow, the man knew his choice. He only turned his head to look at this official Chun who was retreating while shouting. With a pu sound, an invisible force already landed on this official Chin's neck. This official surname Chin's scream came to an abrupt end. His head was sent flying into the air by the hot blood in his chest. "Don't!" A sharp shout rang out. A figure landed on the field like a ghost. This was a judicial sector consecrator who was overseeing this place. He immediately stopped all of the soldiers who wanted to move. Despite this being the case, right now, his eyes were still filled with deep fear, his hands also continuously shaking within his sleeves. This academician was a peak Realm 5 cultivator. He had never seen a Grandmaster fight in his life. But just now, he was certain this person's cultivation was terrifying, and he was definitely a Grandmaster. Also, through this person's previous words and strange expressions, he vaguely guessed a possibility. This possibility caused his breathing to become unstable. If it really was that person, that was a cultivator that even the Yuanwu Emperor was wary of. "You are official Fong Shimu of Fong Ho Province?" He did not dare to stop at all. He bowed to the man whose body was shining with a strange light and asked, "I am Fong Shimu." The man did not deny it and said softly, "But does Chongling still have Fong Ho Province?" This academician of the Judicial Bureau did not dare to answer, and could not answer, because in the previous rumors, the old marquisate of the Fong Marquisate establishment had died in battle with his troops in Yangshan Commandery, and Fong Xiang had also died. Fang Xiaomu had rejected the emperor's will and left Chongling. Then could there still be a Fang Marquisate establishment in Chongling? Fang Xiaomu gently shook his head. He was currently in a very strange state. His body was already extremely clean. However, as if it represented his current emotions, he still unconsciously brushed his clothes. Then he no longer spoke and began to leave. For this place, this was a very good ending. However, this judicial sector consecrator's current mood fluctuations were too great, unable to help but ask, why would someone like your respected self stay here? Chapter 657. This academician was just a peak Realm 5 cultivator. In the world of cultivators, he and someone like Fang Xiaomu were like the distance between heaven and earth. If this was any other ordinary Realm 7 Grandmaster, they would not stop and waste words with someone like him. But at this time, Fang Xiaomu was in a wondrous state. He first had to organize his own emotions. So he stopped walking and even turned around. He looked at the shocked and puzzled academician and said, "Everyone in the world, including Yuan Wu and that person, feels that my cultivation talent is stronger than my brother's. But the truth is not so." This academician suppressed his shock and terror. He looked at Fang Xiaomu, who had faint gemstone lights flowing on his body, and was even more puzzled. Fang Xiaomu's cultivation talent was known to the world. Even that person back then had purposely gone to the Fang establishment and thought that Fang Xiaomu's accomplishments would surpass Fang Xiang and the others. Fang Xiaomu had not fought for many years in Chongling, and had almost no record of fighting. But most cultivators were convinced when they saw Fang Xiaomu. So even though Fang Xiaomu had been cultivating in seclusion these years, his reputation had grown. Fang Xiaomu was the most talented cultivator of his generation. This was something that almost everyone believed. But now he was saying this himself. Had Yuan Wu and that person misjudged? My brother seems inferior to me because he has done everything while I only need to think about cultivation. So in the past many years, he has done a lot of things, while I am just a fool who only knows how to cultivate. Fang Xiaomu thought of the many scenes of these years and felt slightly sad. The place where I am not as good as my brother is that I do not understand him well enough. But he understands me better than myself. What I cultivate is the Tranquil Nature Sutra, and what I cultivate is a tranquil and natural state of mind. In the past, when I was cultivating in seclusion, I raised a pond of fish so that I could see the happiness and joy of the pond of koi fish in the limited tranquil world. Before the Deer Mountain Conference, I had the chance to have a breakthrough. But my brother told me long ago that I was still lacking something. I left Chongling, went with the flow to the sea, and stayed here for a long time. I always felt I was lacking something. Only today, when I heard the news of my brother's death, did I understand what I was lacking. Tranquil and inactive, too pure of heart and few desires. While it suits the mind of my cultivation method, the carp leaping over the dragon gate needs a heart to fight to the death. I do not fight or kill. How can I have the mind to jump out of the water, leave the limited world, and become a dragon? What I lack is this killing intent. My brother understood me too well. He used his own death to give me such an opportunity. Hearing Fang Xiaomu's words, Fang Xiao. But he could not help but ask, "Sir, why do you live here and do such heavy labor work every day? Since I cannot be too tranquil, then I have to look at a different world. Maybe there are things I lack in the world of ordinary people. My mind has become a puddle of still water after many years of cultivation. Fortunately, this cruel official did a good job. His actions made me more and more displeased, and in the end, aroused my killing intent." Fang Xiaomu glanced at the academician and said, "Also, while this place is not close to Chongling, it is not too far." The academician was silent. The rumor said that this person who only knew how to cultivate had stepped out of the sea, left this mortal world, and traveled to the immortal mountains overseas. But in reality, he had always stayed in this mortal world and had not gone far. His cultivation was too low, and he could not guess Fang Xiaomu's cultivation at this time. But looking at the faint treasure light around Fang Xiaomu, he knew that Fang Xiaomu's departure was like a hidden dragon coming out of the abyss. For the Qin dynasty, This was another powerful and terrifying enemy. Where are you preparing to go? The whereabouts of a person like this was very important to the Qin dynasty. So even though he knew that his question could anger the other and get him killed, this academician still took a deep breath and asked as Feng Xiaomu turned to leave. Feng Xiaomu's expression was calm. He did not stop walking and said, "This place is closer to Yin Mountain. Also, what is the meaning in me returning to Chongling now? Who can I kill?" This judicial sector consecrator couldn't say anything else. When Feng Xiaomu's figure completely disappeared from his sight, he felt even colder. He started to think that Feng Xiaomu was using this answer to his question to express his attitude and tell the world. What was the meaning in him returning to Chongling? Who could he kill? But with Feng Xiaomu's present cultivation, how many people in Chongling could he not kill? At most, it was Zheng Xiao and a few others. So he meant that from now on, he would become Zheng Xiao and Yuan Wu's enemy. He would kill Zheng Xiao and Yuan Wu. He told the world he was going to Yin Mountain. At the same time, he told many grandmasters who wanted to go that he was an enemy of the Bazin Kendo ground. If they went there, they would have to fight him. While he had been cultivating and not fighting, how many of the grandmasters in the world had the confidence to win against him? Feng Xiaomu silently walked on the waves. The river was vast, and his mind was vast. He finally understood why Yi Siling, with his talent and years of purposeful suppression, had such accomplishments in cultivation. Because some people's cultivation was hard work and obsession, but people like him were fighting for their lives at every step. If it was peaceful and quiet, and he continued to cultivate in that small courtyard, he might be able to possess an astonishing lifespan. However, in the end, he would probably feel neither joy nor sorrow, and nothing would disturb his heart. In the end, he would become an emotionless wooden person. But people were born with emotions, and many things they could not give up. If he gave up all these, what mark would he leave behind in his life? Then what was the point of living? As he moved forward, layers of pure light were emitted from his body. It was like the occasional ripples on the surface of the water when the sun had just risen on a deserted morning. These layers of pure light were the natural accumulation of his many years of cultivation. At this time, they appeared in his body and slowly condensed into the shape of a sword in front of him, a life-bond sword. This sword sank under his feet and slowly gave off murderousness. The river split open. His sword was like a boat riding the wind and waves, going against the flow. When Feng Xiaomu's life-bond sword formed and he walked towards Yin Mountain, Fu Su, who had been unconscious for a long time in the Thousand Mountain Formation, gradually woke up. He sensed that his injuries were slowly recovering due to some medicinal power. Then he saw Qin Yaoyin, who was closest to him. Chapter 658. Fu Su saw the green jade robes of Min Mountain Sword sect that Qin Yaoyin wore, and his messy hair that looked like a beggar's. He knew that among the cultivators of Min Mountain Sword sect, only the legendary demon breeder would be so unkempt. While that person spent most of his effort on studying beasts, he was skilled in medicine. Like the butcher Gung Run, one was skilled in poison, the other in medicine. They were the best in the world. Fu Su knew that his injuries were getting better. Naturally, it could only be because of this person's medicine. This kind of medicine was very gentle and comfortable. But looking at Qin Yaoyin, Fu Su felt even more pain. He said in great pain, "Elder, are you going to drag all of Min Mountain Sword sect and the entire dynasty in because of some personal grievances? This is not a matter of personal grievances. This is reason." Qin Yaoyin looked calmly at the pained crown prince of the Qin dynasty and said, "Wang Jingming relied on the Bazin Kendo ground. If he wanted to steal the country and take Yuan Wu's throne, it would be very easy. This is for trust, brotherhood, and the morals of the world. But Zheng Xiao betrayed him, Yuan Wu killed him, and destroyed the Bazin Kendo ground. This messed up the love between husband and wife and the friendship between friends. If father and son, husband and wife, brothers and friends do not care about reason, what kind of world is this? To take revenge for a brother, this is not a matter of dragging all of Min Mountain Sword Sect and the dynasty in, but living in the world, people have to be reasonable. Fu Su could not argue. The more he knew about the past, the closer he got to the truth, the more pain he felt. Because he could not understand. How could his father have done such a thing back then? No one likes to fight. Qing Yaoyin looked at him and said, no one likes to fight at the risk of being killed. So you must first understand why people fight like this. Fu Su struggled to breathe. He saw the Dongwu monk sitting at the side like a piece of dead wood. Qin Mu, who looked younger than him, Tantai Guanjian, Ding Ning, and Zhongsun Qinxue. These people were naturally all outstanding talents in the world. However, after these continuous battles, everyone's situation was extremely bad. It could be said that they looked very miserable. He was even more speechless when he thought about why these people, who could have lived a good life just by relying on their cultivation, would fight like this. Then he did not see the infant dragon curled up in Zhongsun Qinshue's sleeve, but saw the dozen soaring snakes in the dust mountain. Seeing these serpents that belonged to Jiaodong Commandery submit to the people around him, he was shocked. Yi Xiao was not dead yet. He was still in a state of dying. At this moment, there were traces of cultivators everywhere outside the dust mountains. Any one of them could easily kill him, as insignificant as crushing an ant. However, there was no meaning in killing him right now. Moreover, as the instigator of this situation that could change the entire world, with his identity and the price he had paid, there were many cultivators who would not let him die so easily. At this moment, there was a Jiaodong Commandery cultivator in yellow robes standing next to him. This Jiaodong Commandery cultivator was a very old woman, her wrinkles enough to absorb a bowl of rain. She held a bone whistle in her hand. Behind her, there were several cultivators dressed in the same yellow robes standing on both sides. Her eyes were filled with endless emotions as she watched the last few soaring snakes enter the thousands of dust mountains. Are you satisfied? She asked Yi Xiao softly. Yi Xiao could no longer speak, but a look of satisfaction and gratitude appeared in his eyes. He had invested his entire life and everything that was left of his family. Jiaodong Commandery had invested the efforts of many generations. With so many serpents entering the formation, even if the people inside did not die, they would not have much strength left. What was left next was naturally the final harvest. In his somewhat unfocused eyes, a bright red color began to appear. A cultivator in red robes appeared here. In front of him, and the old woman from Jiaodong Commandery. This was an old man with white hair and a white beard. There was a strange look of violence and disbelief on his face. When the old man appeared in front of him, Yi Xiao's eyes were filled with even more satisfaction. Few people in the world of cultivators like to wear red robes. First, this color was too bright and flamboyant. Red was very tacky and too conspicuous. On some battlefields, it was easy to attract the attention of the enemy and become the first target to be killed. Even in Chongling, some official robes that showed authority were deep red, dark red, or purplish red. Yet, when Wang Jingming fought his way into Chongling, the last cultivator to appear before Wang Jingming, in front of everyone's eyes, was this same red robe. A flame surged out of the red robe, covering Wang Jingming. It seemed to be alive as it swallowed and burned all of Wang Jingming's blood. It burned Wang Jingming, who had died in battle, until not even a speck of dust remained. The red robe was the master of fire, the sect master of the Leaf Fire sect. In the legends, when Wang Jingming's body was burned, the Leaf Fire sect was completely destroyed by some experts of the Bazin Kendo ground. But there were too many things to care about back then. There was news that the Master of Fire was only injured and not dead. There was also news that he had been killed. But in the end, there was no proof. Now, this old man was the Master of Fire. He was still alive and naturally did not die back then. Back then, he was arranged to be the last to act and burn everything. Naturally, it was because of Yuan Wu and Zheng Xiu's fear. Yuan Wu and Zheng Xiu did not know the secrets of the 9-Death Silkworm. They had heard some stories about the 9-Death Silkworm, but they did not even know if Wang Jingming cultivated the 9-Death Silkworm. So to be safe, they needed a cultivator like him, who could not leave behind a drop of blood from Wang Jingming. But there was still a problem. The Master of Fire could not understand what had gone wrong. This fear of the unknown made him feel violent and uneasy. But one thing was certain: he could not let the people in the Dust Mountain grow again. For Yuanwu and Zheng Xiao, even if they were not 100% confident, they needed to make things more stable. So the Master of Fire alone was not enough. After the appearance of Great Crimson Robe, another cultivator slowly appeared on the hill. This cultivator wore plain white robes, but because his body gave off a type of death energy that only Ean's spirit and ghost cultivators had, together with the white bamboo staff in his hand, he looked just like he was dressed in mourning clothes. Chapter 659. The Master of Fire's anxiousness came from his terror of the Bazin Kindo ground and the 9-death silkworm, but his ruthlessness came from his extreme confidence. He thought that if the 9-death silkworm really had a unique ability to come back from the dead, if even his only fire could not destroy it, then no one in the world could destroy the 9-death silkworm. It was useless even if the cultivators responsible for destroying the corpses came. But when the red robe encountered the white robe, and he saw the face of the cultivator, he paled and exclaimed, "Crown Prince Hugo!" Even Yi Xiao, who was not fully conscious, heard the great shock in the Master of Fire's voice. "Even he is here?" This was the first thought that appeared in Yi Xiao's mind. This white-robed cultivator's figure and appearance were similar to Yuanwu, because he was Yuanwu's brother, but they were of the same father, but different mothers. He was the 8th son of the previous emperor of the Qin dynasty, Cheng Jiao. Back then, after the previous emperor's favorite imperial son lost to Yuanwu, Yuanwu still did not easily become the crown prince. Originally, the previous emperor had not wanted to make Yuanwu the crown prince. In a written decree, Cheng Jiao was his chosen candidate for the crown prince, and wanted to use him to restrict Yuanwu and the Bazin Kindo ground. There were many strange stories about this crown prince among the people. They said that he was born with jade in his mouth, and was a king bestowed by the heavens. But no matter what the story was, he was defeated even faster than Yuanwu's previous enemies. Before the decree was sent out, he had disappeared from Chongling. There were 2 reasons for the Master of Fire's great shock. First, he was an old man of Chongling who had experienced most of the battles back then, and was Yuanwu's confidant. As the last person to clean up after the Battle of Chongling back then, he naturally knew that Crown Prince Hugo's defeat back then was because he cultivated a powerful and evil ghostly art. In the end, he was too hasty and went mad. The other reason was that in any version of the story, this Crown Prince Hugo had been killed, but now he was alive, and clearly, he was the other cultivator he was waiting for to ensure the destruction of the 9-death silkworm. Both he and Crown Prince Hugo were able to appear so quickly outside the formation of the Dust Mountains because of Zheng Xiao and Yuanwu's initial arrangements. This spring war against the Chu was a trap set to lure out the 9-death silkworm. If there was an accident, then Fu Su was trapped in this trap. Crown Prince Hugo was Yuanwu and Zheng Xiao. Why was he used by Yuanwu and Zheng Xiao? Do not doubt my intentions for coming. When Crown Prince Hugo came close, everyone saw that the white bamboo staff in his hand was made from fine white jade, carved into the shape of bamboo. His expression was calm, but his presence was like all cultivators of the ghostly arts, dark and cold. He looked at the Master of Fire, 2 dots of white light flashing in his eyes like 2 small white skeletons talking. The voice seemed to come from these 2 white skeletons. "Since I can appear here, it means that Yuanwu and Zheng Xiao trust me, so you do not have to worry." After a pause, Crown Prince Hugo glanced at the Dust Mountains and said coldly, "If this is hate, I hate Wang Jingming and the Bazin Kindo ground more than anyone else." The Master of Fire slowly nodded. He took a deep breath and quickly calmed himself down. He said, "For the 2 of us to come, we must each have our uses. What should we do?" "The leaf fire you cultivate can search for any drop of flesh of a cultivator and burn everything with their presence to ash. Even the ash will be melted," Crown Prince Hugo said indifferently. If even that is not enough to destroy the 9-death silkworm, then the 9-death silkworm will not spread. You can find every drop of flesh and burn it to dust. Then I have a way to collect all the dust. I do not believe that if even the dust is trapped in my staff, the 9-death silkworm will have anything left in the world. Even if the dust can revive in my staff, I will destroy it again. If it lives 100 times, I will destroy it 100 times. When Crown Prince Hugo said the last words, his expression was still indifferent. But everyone present could hear the great hatred in his words. The Master of Fire did not know what had happened in the past to make this Crown Prince so hateful. But the flesh and vital energy of a cultivator was the accumulation of all kinds of energies. There was no loss of energy. No matter how wondrous the 9-death silkworm was, it could not revive. If he could truly eliminate all future troubles, he could be at ease. You can enter the formation. The old woman in yellow robes from Jiaodong Commandery urged. While she was just an old woman, she was the person of the highest seniority in Jiaodong Commandery, and Zheng Xiu's great-grandmother. She had lived longer than any expert of the same generation in Jiaodong Commandery. So she knew that the key to success was to respond quickly and not create new problems. Now, many cultivators had yet to arrive. Many cultivators had already been blocked outside. While Qin Yaoyin had killed an old academician of the imperial city and forced his way into the formation, he had not won easily. So many serpents had entered. Other than Qin Yaoyin, who else could fight? Now, she, the Master of Fire, and Crown Prince Hugo could enter the formation to decide victory. No matter what kind of cultivators came from outside, that was when victory was decided, and there was no meaning. Enough! Crown Prince Hugo looked at her and the Master of Fire, and nodded in satisfaction. He had come here to see if the people who should have come had arrived. In the next moment, white waves surged under his feet. An extremely uncomfortable energy instantly condensed into the shape of a white-boned ship under his feet. It stuck close to the ground, but as if it was gliding with the wind and the waves, it sailed towards the 1,000-dust mountains at an astonishing speed. This kind of and ghostly energy made it difficult for other cultivators to get close. The Master of Fire frowned slightly and flew up with flames around him. He was dozens of feet away from Crown Prince Hugo. Above them, there was the cry of a crane. The old woman in yellow robes was riding a red-crowned crane, like the immortals in stories, shrouded in clouds. The red-crowned crane's feathers shone like white gold, and the shrouding clouds came out of its body. Its energy was as strong as the soaring snakes from before, and it was also a rare being. There was a muffled boom. The 1,000-dust mountains all trembled, and it was as if a hole had been torn in the formation. Dust sprayed out, but as the three of them entered, the dust mountains stopped moving, and the 1,000-dust mountains remained still. Chapter 660. Crown Prince Hugo entered the dust mountains first, but when he entered the formation, the white energy surging off his body suddenly retracted. The white-boned ship under his feet disappeared, all of it coming back to his body, forming a terrifying white bone armor. Only his eyes were exposed, flashing with fire. It was as if Baigu had transformed into a demon god. The Master of Fire entered the formation, and the flames retracted. His red robe flashed slightly and even covered some of the energy vibrations that a cultivator should have. But the yellow-robed old woman above the two roared like thunder. Her energy surged like a tide, like a storm had been forced into her body, and was about to erupt. It is Zheng, and the cry of the crane came from the sky, and it was impossible for people not to sense the thunder. When the first cry sounded, Qin Yaoyin's expression grew solemn, and he said quickly, "Someone from Jiaodong Commandery?" Qian Mu had never heard of this name, but from Qin Yaoyin's expression, he knew that the person who came was not ordinary. The old monster of Jiaodong Commandery. She has lived longer than anyone in Jiaodong Commandery. When she was young, she cultivated in the South Sea Sword House and killed the master of the South Sea Sword House in a sword competition. Qin Yaoyin glanced at Qian Mu. The sword moves of the South Sea Sword House are very strange, and Jiaodong Commandery has many strange moves. Qian Mu's brows furrowed deeply. For cultivators, if they could not cross the door between realms 7 and 8, then the only method they could use was to learn more moves against their enemies. The longer they lived, the more strange moves they could learn and comprehend. This was another way of growing. At this time, sensing the roars of thunder coming from the Jiaodong Commandery monster's body, he was certain that the amount of primal energies of the universe and vital energy in this yellow-robed old woman's body far surpassed ordinary cultivators. For some reason, the primal energies of the universe that ordinary cultivators drew into their bodies were gentle and calm. When they were released, they would cause more primal energies of the universe to turn into power and show their violent side. But the primal energies of the universe in this old monster of Jiaodong Commandery were very violent to begin with. If you want to make a move, I might not be able to handle it alone. At this time, Qin Yaoyin glanced at Yantai Guanjian and said something that shocked Qian Mu even more. The descendant of the imperial city elder had died when he fell, but everyone could feel his strength. Qin Yaoyin, who could easily kill him, was naturally stronger. But now, Qin Yaoyin did not have enough confidence facing this old monster of Jiaodong Commandery and needed Yantai Guanjian to work together. Just how terrifying were these people? Yantai Guanjian was about to nod when Ding Ning shook his head and said softly, "To defeat a person, first defeat their heart. She first used the soaring snakes to exhaust our vital energy, so we will have the soaring snakes exhaust her vital energy." Qin Yaoyin stilled slightly and then silently agreed. Zhang Sun Qinxue shook her sleeves to let the young nether dragon sense her intentions. No one had any objections, because no one was more experienced and insightful than Ding Ning when it came to dealing with enemies. Ding Ning looked up. In the sky above, the shadow of a crane appeared. At the same time, on the white crane, the old monster of Jiaodong Commandery, Zhengyin, saw the figures of Ding Ning and the others. Looking at the Donghu monk, Zhang Sun Qinxue and the others, the yellow-robed old woman was very satisfied. But she did not want to waste time and did not want to converse with these people. Following her wishes, the white crane she was sitting on let out an even more piercing cry. With this sharp sound that made people feel uncomfortable in their energy seas, a golden thread of fire came out of the mouth of this red-crowned white crane. The golden thread of fire was only a thin thread, but it created wild winds in the space it passed through. Even the space seemed to be twisted by the energy contained within. Qin Yaoyin narrowed his eyes and waved his sleeve. A bright beam of sword qi shot out from his sleeve, intercepting the line of fire that was descending from the sky. Boom! Amidst the muffled and horrifying explosion, the line of fire was dispersed and turned into countless clouds of fire that swept outwards. This strange crane was also hit by the shockwave, and its body was involuntarily pulled up more than 30 meters in the air. Qin Yaoyin's knees bent slightly. This attack seemed to be evenly matched, but a dot of mixed gold light followed behind his sword energy. It passed through the scattered fire clouds and came under the white crane, crashing towards the white crane's abdomen. This white crane was a strange beast that was even more powerful than those flood dragons. Naturally, it could sense the fatal danger. Its platinum feathers exploded, and at this critical moment, it spat out a wisp of golden fire from its mouth, attacking the tiny speck of mixed gold light below. The mixed gold light flashed, avoiding this thread of fire, and flashed towards another part of the white crane's body. The white crane flashed and spat out another thread of fire. In an instant, the golden line of fire and the speck of golden light had already clashed several times. The golden line of fire and the speck of golden light dodged and intersected in the air, like the flying swords of two powerful cultivators fighting. The speed was shocking, but for a moment, neither could do anything to the other. This mixed gold light was naturally the six-winged gold cicada that Qin Yaoyin had raised, a legendary foreign creature. Yet Zheng Yin, who was on the white crane, did not divert her attention to deal with it. The storm in her body had reached its peak and surged out. She reached out, her wrinkled face flashing with a fanatical light. A blue ball of light appeared in her hand. It was only the size of a goose egg, but there was seawater and lightning spinning inside, and even reflected the shadows of many islands and giant ships. This blue ball of light simply and violently broke free from her hand. Like a child smashing a rock, it smashed downwards. What method is this? The moment this blue ball of light left her hand, Qian Mu's eyes were filled with shock. He was a terrifying grandmaster, but also a child. In his perception, in this blue ball of light, there were real islands, real ships, real waves and lightning. Sky-holding ball. Ding Ning quickly explained Qian Mu's question. A secret art of Jiaodong commandery. But it first requires the crystal core of Zhe to be made into a life bond item before it can be used. Zhe is a kind of deep-sea beast and can directly consume the primal energies of the universe, regardless of whether the energy is good or bad, and suited to its body. For cultivators, this is like consuming the primal energies of the universe. Qian Mu immediately understood why this old monster of Jiaodong commandery could hold so much primal energies of the universe. This was using the crystal core of a powerful beast to make it into a life bond item. But ordinary cultivators could not imagine such a method. It was also at this moment that a dozen or so huge shadows emerged from the dust mountain. Sensing the yuan qi energy emanating from the dozen or so massive bodies, Zhang was stunned. Even the descending heaven holding ball paused for a moment. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.